Imagine standing on the edge of an endless sea of grass, where the wind carries whispers of a civilization that would reshape the entire course of human history. Between 6,000 and 5,000 years ago, in the vast expanse stretching from the Dnieper River to the towering Ural Mountains, something extraordinary was happening. A people were emerging from the mists of prehistory who would become the ancestors of nearly half the world's population today. These were the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and their story is nothing less than the origin tale of Western civilization itself. The Pontic-Caspian steppe was not merely a geographical location, but a crucible of innovation, where the fundamental technologies that would define human civilization for millennia were being forged. Picture this landscape as it existed 5,000 years ago. Rolling grasslands extending to every horizon, punctuated by river valleys that provided water and shelter, home to vast herds of wild horses and cattle that would soon become the foundation of an entirely new way of life. The archaeological evidence recovered from this region tells a story of remarkable sophistication that challenges our assumptions about prehistoric societies. At the site of Mikhailovka, on the lower Dnieper River, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of substantial settlements that reveal a society far more advanced than simple nomadic bands. These were permanent communities, featuring rectangular houses constructed with stone foundations, evidence of advanced bronze working techniques that produced tools and weapons of exceptional quality, and storage facilities that indicate the accumulation of surplus wealth. The inhabitants of these settlements practiced a mixed economy that combined cattle herding with limited agriculture, establishing a pattern that would become characteristic of Indo-European societies throughout their subsequent expansion across Eurasia. The pottery assemblages recovered from these sites display distinctive cord-mark decorations that would become a signature marker of Indo-European material culture, appearing at sites thousands of kilometers apart as these peoples spread across the ancient world. Bronze axes, daggers, and ornaments demonstrate metallurgical knowledge that surpassed contemporary cultures in surrounding regions, providing the technological foundation for military advantages that would prove decisive in subsequent conquests. The sophistication of these artifacts challenges the outdated notion that prehistoric peoples were primitive or unsophisticated, revealing instead communities capable of complex craft specialization, long-distance trade, and social organization that could coordinate large-scale construction projects. The Sredny Stog culture, dating to approximately 4,500 to 3,500 BC, provides crucial insights into the formative period of Proto-Indo-European society. Archaeological evidence from sites like Derivka reveals what may be the first clear evidence of horse domestication in human history, a development that would prove more consequential than any other technological innovation of the ancient world. Worn tooth patterns on horse remains indicate the use of bits and bridles, suggesting that these early steppe dwellers had already begun the process of transforming wild horses into the mounts that would carry their descendants across continents. These early horsemen constructed kurgan burial mounds that would become the signature archaeological marker of Indo-European expansion, visible monuments that proclaim territorial control and ancestral authority across the landscape. The grave goods recovered from these burial sites tell a story of a hierarchical society where elite warriors were interred with bronze weapons, horse sacrifices, and wheeled vehicles that proclaimed their status and power. The investment of labor required to construct these monuments demonstrates the ability of early Indo-European leaders to command substantial followings and organize community resources for projects that serve primarily symbolic and religious functions. The linguistic evidence that supports our understanding of Proto-Indo-European society comes from the remarkable science of comparative philology, which has revealed a unity underlying the diverse Indo-European language family that stretches from Iceland to India. By systematically comparing cognate words across Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Germanic, Celtic, and other branches, scholars have reconstructed substantial portions of the original Proto-Indo-European vocabulary, providing a window into the material culture and worldview of these ancient peoples that complements and confirms the archaeological record. The presence of shared terms for wheeled vehicles, including words for wheel, axle, and wagon, indicates that Proto-Indo-Europeans possessed advanced transportation technology before the major dispersals began. Similarly, the extensive vocabulary related to horses suggests not merely familiarity with these animals, but their central importance in Proto-Indo-European society. Terms for riding, harnessing, and horse breeding appear across the language family with remarkable consistency, confirming the archaeological evidence for early horse domestication and the development of equestrian culture that would prove so consequential for subsequent human history. The reconstructed vocabulary reveals a people intimately familiar with metallurgy, particularly bronze working. Common Indo-European roots for metals, tools, and weapons demonstrate that these technologies were well established before the major dispersals began. Terms for specific bronze implements, including axes, spears, and daggers, appear across the language family with remarkable consistency, aligning perfectly with archaeological findings from steppe sites, where bronze artifacts represent some of the most sophisticated metalwork of the period. This convergence of linguistic and archaeological evidence provides compelling confirmation of the technological sophistication that gave Proto-Indo-Europeans decisive advantages over their contemporaries. Proto-Indo-European religious and social vocabulary provides additional insights into their cultural practices that would shape the development of religious traditions across Eurasia. Reconstructed terms for religious concepts, including words for sacred fire, ritual sacrifice, and divine authority, suggest a complex pantheon and elaborate ceremonial practices that would evolve into the religious systems of ancient India, Greece, Rome, and the Germanic and Celtic peoples. The linguistic evidence for patriarchal social organization, warrior bands, and cattle-based wealth systems corresponds closely with archaeological interpretations of kurgan burials and settlement patterns, creating a coherent picture of a society organized around principles that would persist throughout Indo-European history. The environmental conditions of the Eurasian steppes played a crucial role in shaping Proto-Indo-European culture and driving the technological innovations that would enable their expansion. The vast grasslands provided ideal grazing for cattle and horses, while the relative scarcity of arable land encouraged mobility and pastoral specialization. Seasonal patterns of rainfall and temperature fluctuations required sophisticated knowledge of animal husbandry and pasture management, creating selective pressures that favored innovation and adaptability. These environmental challenges fostered developments in transportation, particularly the creation of wheeled vehicles that could efficiently move people, goods, and livestock across great distances. The steppe environment also influenced Proto-Indo-European social organization and military practices in ways that would prove decisive for their subsequent expansion. The open terrain favored mounted warfare and rapid movement, leading to the development of mobile warrior bands that could strike quickly and retreat before enemy forces could organize effective resistance. The necessity of protecting herds from raiders and wild predators created a martial culture where fighting skills were essential for survival and prosperity. Archaeological evidence suggests that bronze weapons were not merely ceremonial objects, but practical tools used in regular combat and raiding, indicating a society where violence was normalized and military prowess was highly valued. Climate data from the 4th millennium BC indicates that the Pontic-Caspian steppes experienced relatively favorable conditions during the formative period of Proto-Indo-European culture. Pollen analysis and other paleo-environmental indicators suggest adequate rainfall and moderate temperatures that supported extensive grasslands and diverse wildlife populations. These conditions enabled the expansion of pastoral populations and the accumulation of surplus wealth that funded technological innovations and social stratification. The favorable climate created a window of opportunity during which Proto-Indo-European populations could grow and develop the capabilities that would enable their subsequent expansion across Eurasia. Recent genetic studies utilizing ancient DNA analysis have revolutionized our understanding of Proto-Indo-European origins and dispersals, providing direct biological evidence that confirms and extends the conclusions drawn from archaeological and linguistic research. Examination of skeletal remains from Kurgan burials has revealed distinctive genetic signatures that can be traced across subsequent Indo-European populations, demonstrating biological continuity that parallels the cultural and linguistic connections documented through other methods. The predominance of Y chromosome haplogroups R1a and R1b among ancient steppe populations provides compelling evidence for the genetic continuity between Proto-Indo-Europeans and their descendants throughout Europe and Asia. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA from female lineages reveals a more complex pattern, suggesting that Proto-Indo-European expansions involved the movement of predominantly male populations who intermarried with local women in their new territories. This pattern aligns with historical accounts of Indo-European migrations and conquests, where warrior bands established political dominance while adopting certain aspects of local cultures. The genetic evidence supports a model of elite dominance rather than complete population replacement, explaining how Indo-European languages and cultural practices could spread so widely while incorporating substantial genetic contributions from pre-existing populations. Genome-wide analysis of ancient DNA has confirmed the substantial genetic impact of steppe populations on later European and Asian populations, demonstrating that Indo-European expansions were not merely cultural diffusions, but involved substantial population movements that permanently altered the genetic landscape of vast regions. Studies of Bronze Age skeletons from across Europe show clear evidence of steppe ancestry, with percentages varying by region and time period in ways that reflect the complex processes of migration, conquest, and cultural integration that characterized Indo-European expansion. The genetic data provides independent confirmation of migration routes and settlement patterns inferred from archaeological and linguistic evidence, creating a comprehensive picture of one of the most significant demographic transformations in human history. The distribution patterns of R1a and R1b haplogroups correspond closely with the historical spread of Indo-European languages, providing biological confirmation of linguistic and archaeological conclusions. R1a frequencies are highest in Slavic-speaking populations and in Indian regions that received substantial migration from steppe populations during different periods, while R1b shows peak frequencies in Western Europe, particularly among Celtic and Germanic populations reflecting the western branch of Indo-European expansion. These genetic patterns demonstrate the lasting demographic impact of migrations that occurred thousands of years ago, showing how the movements of ancient peoples continue to shape the biological characteristics of modern populations. Archaeological investigations have revealed the sophisticated technological achievements that gave Proto-Indo-Europeans decisive advantages over their contemporaries, enabling their expansion across territories that had been occupied by other populations for millennia. Bronze working techniques developed on the steppes produced weapons and tools of exceptional quality and durability that outperformed the stone and copper implements used by neighboring cultures. Analyses of bronze artifacts show advanced understanding of alloy composition and heat treatment methods that maximized the effectiveness of copper-tin mixtures, creating implements that were harder, more durable, and more effective than anything previously available. The development of wheeled transport represents perhaps the most significant technological innovation of Proto-Indo-European culture, enabling forms of mobility and logistical capability that had never before existed in human history. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials includes actual wagon remains and detailed artistic representations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of wheel construction and vehicle design. These early wagons featured solid wooden wheels attached to fixed axles, with body construction optimized for carrying heavy loads across rough terrain. The mobility provided by wheeled transport enabled Proto-Indo-Europeans to exploit vast territories and maintain communication networks across enormous distances, creating the foundation for the expansive political and economic systems that would characterize Indo-European civilizations. Horse domestication and riding techniques gave Proto-Indo-Europeans unparalleled military and economic advantages that no contemporary culture could match. Evidence from bit wear on horse teeth indicates sophisticated training methods that produced reliable mounts capable of complex maneuvers, while the selective breeding programs, evident in the increasing size and robustness of horses over time, demonstrate systematic efforts to improve equine capabilities. The combination of horses and wheeled vehicles created transportation systems that far exceeded the capabilities of contemporary cultures dependent on foot travel or simple boats, providing the mobility advantage that proved crucial in subsequent expansions and conquests. The material culture recovered from Proto-Indo-European sites demonstrates a society capable of producing surplus wealth and supporting specialized craftsmen whose skills required years of training to master. Bronze ornaments, decorated pottery, and elaborate grave goods indicate social stratification and the accumulation of prestige items that proclaimed the status and achievements of their owners. Trade networks extended across vast distances, bringing amber from the Baltic, shells from distant seas, and exotic stones from mountain regions. These exchange systems required sophisticated organizational abilities and established the foundation for later Indo-European commercial networks that would connect civilizations across Eurasia. The transformation of Proto-Indo-European society reached its zenith with the emergence of the Yamnaya culture around 30,300 BC, marking a decisive shift from earlier traditions toward a more militarized and expansionist civilization that would reshape the demographic landscape of the ancient world. Named after the Russian word for pit, referring to their characteristic burial practices, the Yamnaya represented the full flowering of steppe pastoralism and the technological innovations that would enable their descendants to dominate vast territories from Ireland to India. Archaeological excavations across the Pontic-Caspian steppes have revealed a culture of unprecedented sophistication, combining advanced metallurgy, revolutionary transportation technology, and social organization optimized for conquest and territorial expansion. The Yamnaya heartlands stretched across the grasslands between the Bug and Ural rivers, encompassing territories that today form parts of Ukraine, southern Russia, and western Kazakhstan. This was a landscape of extraordinary scale, where the horizon seemed to extend forever and the sky dominated everything beneath it. Sites like Repin, Mikhailovka II, and numerous Kurgan cemeteries across the region provide detailed insights into Yamnaya material culture and social practices. revealing a civilization that had achieved levels of sophistication that would not be matched in many regions for millennia. The pottery assemblages from these sites display the characteristic cord-marked decorations that became a hallmark of early Indo-European cultures, a distinctive artistic tradition that can be traced across thousands of kilometers as Yamnaya populations and their descendants spread across Eurasia. Bronze implements demonstrate metallurgical techniques that surpassed contemporary civilizations in complexity and effectiveness, producing weapons and tools that provided decisive advantages in both warfare and economic production. Radiocarbon dating places the height of Yamnaya influence between 3,300 and 2,600 BC, coinciding with the period of initial Indo-European dispersals that would reshape the demographic landscape of Eurasia. Yamnaya settlements reveal a society organized around mobile pastoralism, with substantial seasonal camps that could accommodate large populations and their livestock during different phases of the annual cycle. Excavations at Mikhailovka III uncovered rectangular structures with stone foundations, storage pits for grain and other provisions, and workshop areas where bronze smiths crafted weapons and tools using techniques that represented the cutting edge of contemporary technology. The site yielded numerous bronze axes, daggers, and spearheads displaying sophisticated craftsmanship, including complex hafting techniques and decorative elements that proclaimed the status of their owners. Pottery sherds from cooking and storage vessels show evidence of dairy processing, indicating that cattle herding had become the economic foundation of Yamnaya society. The ability to process milk into cheese, yogurt, and other preserved dairy products enabled Yamnaya populations to extract maximum nutritional value from their herds, while creating storable food supplies that could sustain communities through lean periods. This dairy-based economy provided the caloric foundation for population growth and the surplus wealth that funded military expeditions and technological innovations. The revolutionary adoption of wheeled vehicles transformed Yamnaya capabilities for both warfare and long-distance movement, creating possibilities for mobility and logistical support that had never before existed in human history. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials includes actual wagon remains with preserved wooden wheels, axles, and body frameworks that demonstrate advanced carpentry techniques requiring specialized knowledge and tools. These vehicles featured solid wooden wheels, carved from single pieces of wood, or constructed from multiple planks, held together with wooden dowels and metal reinforcements, representing engineering achievements that required sophisticated understanding of materials and mechanical principles. The wagons measured approximately 4 meters in length and 2 meters in width, capable of carrying substantial loads across the steppes while maintaining structural integrity over rough terrain. Detailed analysis of wheel construction reveals sophisticated understanding of load distribution and mechanical stress, with design features that minimized wear while maximizing durability. The wheels attached to fixed axles through bronze or wooden bearings that reduced friction and prevented premature wear, while wagon bodies incorporated flexible suspension systems using leather straps and wooden springs that absorbed shocks from uneven ground. These innovations enabled Yamnaya groups to transport entire households, including elderly members, children, and accumulated wealth, across distances that would have been impossible for pedestrian societies. The mobility provided by wheeled transport fundamentally transformed the possibilities for human settlement and territorial control, enabling populations to exploit vast territories while maintaining social cohesion and communication networks. Families could move with their possessions, herds could be driven to distant pastures, and military forces could be supplied across extended campaigns, creating capabilities that gave Yamnaya populations decisive advantages over their more sedentary neighbors. The military applications of wheeled transport proved equally significant for Yamnaya expansion. Warriors utilized war carts equipped with bronze-reinforced sides and specialized fittings for weapon storage, creating mobile platforms that combine transportation with combat capability. These vehicles served as mobile command platforms during battles and provided rapid transportation for elite fighters across the battlefield, enabling tactical flexibility that foot-bound enemies could not match. The psychological impact of wheeled vehicles on populations unfamiliar with such technology cannot be underestimated, as the sight and sound of approaching war carts would have created panic and demoralization before combat even commenced. Horse domestication reached new levels of sophistication under Yamnaya culture, transforming these animals from occasional mounts into integral components of military and economic systems that defined Yamnaya society. Excavations at Yamnaya sites have yielded numerous horse skeletons displaying clear evidence of bit wear, indicating systematic training and regular use for riding. The horses themselves were larger and more robust than their Sredni-Stog predecessors, suggesting selective breeding programs designed to produce animals capable of carrying armed warriors and pulling heavy loads. Bit technology advanced considerably during the Yamnaya period, with bronze and bone examples showing complex designs optimized for control and communication between rider and mount. These bits featured jointed mouthpieces that provided precise steering capabilities, while decorative elements proclaimed the status of their owners. Harness fittings recovered from burial contexts include bronze cheek pieces, strap distributors, and ornamental plaques that transformed functional equipment into symbols of wealth and power, demonstrating the integration of practical technology with social display that characterized Yamnaya material culture. The combination of horses and wheeled vehicles created transportation systems of unprecedented capability that revolutionized the possibilities for human movement and territorial control. Yamnaya herders could move vast cattle herds across seasonal pastures while maintaining rapid communication between dispersed groups, enabling the coordination of economic activities across territories spanning hundreds of kilometers. Warriors mounted on horseback could conduct reconnaissance missions, launch surprise attacks, and retreat before enemy forces could organize effective resistance, creating tactical advantages that proved decisive in subsequent expansions. The mobility advantage provided by horse-drawn vehicles enabled Yamnaya groups to exploit territories spanning hundreds of kilometers while maintaining social cohesion and military coordination. This capability fundamentally transformed the relationship between human populations and geographical space, enabling forms of territorial control and political organization that had never before been possible. The Yamnaya demonstrated that mobile populations could dominate sedentary agricultural communities through superior mobility and military capability, establishing patterns that would characterize Indo-European expansion throughout subsequent millennia. Kurgan burial traditions reached their most elaborate expression during the Yamnaya period, reflecting the hierarchical social structures and warrior aristocracies that dominated late Proto-Indo-European society. The largest kurgans rose to heights exceeding 10 meters and covered areas of several hundred square meters, requiring coordinated labor from entire communities over extended periods. Construction involved sophisticated engineering techniques, including stone retaining walls, drainage systems, and carefully planned burial chambers designed to protect grave goods and human remains for millennia. The primary burials within major kurgans reveal the extraordinary wealth and status of Yamnaya elites, providing detailed insights into the material culture and social organization of this remarkable civilization. Male warriors were typically interred in contracted positions on their right sides, heads oriented toward the east in accordance with cosmological beliefs that connected the daily rebirth of the sun with concepts of heroic afterlife and eternal warfare. Surrounding these primary burials were bronze weapons, horse sacrifices, and wheeled vehicles that proclaimed the authority and achievements of the deceased. The bronze assemblages from these burials include battle axes with elaborate shaft-hole construction, daggers with complex hilting systems, and spearheads displaying advanced metallurgical techniques. Many weapons show clear signs of use wear, indicating that they were practical implements employed in actual combat, rather than merely ceremonial objects. The presence of combat damage on weapons buried with elite warriors demonstrates that Yamnaya society valued martial prowess, and that elite status was achieved through demonstrated military capability, rather than merely inherited position. Female burials, while less numerous in primary positions, demonstrate the important roles women played in Yamnaya society. Elite women were buried with bronze ornaments, including elaborate headdresses, torques, and spiral arm rings that required considerable metallurgical skill to produce. Pottery vessels associated with female burials often show evidence of specialized functions, including drinking cups, storage jars, and ritual implements that suggest roles in religious ceremonies and household management. The investment of resources in female burials indicates that women of high status commanded significant respect, and that their contributions to Yamnaya society were recognized and commemorated. The secondary burials surrounding primary interments reveal the complex social hierarchies that characterized Yamnaya culture. Retainer burials include warriors, craftsmen, and servants who were apparently sacrificed to accompany their lords in death, demonstrating beliefs about the continuation of social relationships in the afterlife and the power of elite individuals to command the lives of their dependents. Horse sacrifices were particularly elaborate, with complete animals or carefully selected portions buried in specific arrangements around the central grave. Some kurgans contain multiple horse skulls arranged in circular patterns, while others include entire horses with preserved harness fittings and riding equipment. Analysis of kurgan construction sequences reveals the gradual accumulation of burials over extended periods, with later interments added to existing mounds through careful excavation and resealing procedures. This practice created sacred landscapes where multiple generations of elite families established their claims to territorial control and ancestral authority, transforming the steppe into a memorial landscape that proclaimed the power and continuity of ruling lineages. The investment of labor and resources required for kurgan construction demonstrates the ability of Yamnaya leaders to command substantial followings and organize large-scale construction projects that served primarily symbolic and religious functions. The westward migrations that began during the later Yamnaya period mark the commencement of Indo-European demographic expansion across Europe and beyond, initiating one of the most significant population movements in human history. Archaeological evidence from the Danube Valley shows clear evidence of Yamnaya presence by 3000 BC, with characteristic pottery styles, bronze implements, and burial practices appearing at sites previously occupied by Neolithic farming communities. The Usatovo culture of the Dniester region represents one of the earliest manifestations of this westward movement, combining Yamnaya material culture with local traditions in ways that foreshadowed later patterns of Indo-European settlement and cultural adaptation. Excavations at sites like Mayaki and Usatovo itself have revealed fortified settlements featuring Yamnaya-style rectangular houses, bronze working facilities, and kurgan cemeteries that demonstrate the establishment of permanent Yamnaya populations in previously non-Indo-European territories. The bronze assemblages from these sites include both typical Yamnaya weapon types and new forms adapted to local conditions and raw material availability, demonstrating the flexibility and adaptability that characterized Indo-European expansion. Pottery styles show clear Yamnaya influence, while incorporating decorative elements derived from earlier Cucuteni Tripilia traditions, revealing processes of cultural synthesis that would characterize Indo-European settlement throughout their expansion. The demographic impact of these early migrations appears to have been substantial, with genetic analysis of skeletal remains showing significant steppe ancestry among populations that had previously displayed purely Neolithic European characteristics. The pattern suggests organized colonization rather than gradual cultural diffusion, with Yamnaya groups establishing political dominance while intermarrying with local populations. This process created hybrid societies that retained Indo-European languages and key cultural practices, while adapting to new environmental conditions and incorporating useful local technologies. The Balkans witnessed similar patterns of Yamnaya expansion, with sites across modern-day Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary showing clear evidence of steppe influence during the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BC. The Baden culture of the Carpathian Basin displays numerous Yamnaya characteristics, including wheeled vehicles, horse remains, and metallurgical traditions derived from steppe prototypes. Kurgan burials appear across the region, often superimposed on earlier Tel settlements in ways that suggest conquest and territorial reorganization rather than peaceful cultural exchange. The technological advantages that enabled Yamnaya expansion extended beyond transportation and metallurgy to include advanced weapon systems optimized for mobile warfare. Bronze battle axes from Yamnaya contexts display sophisticated shaft-hole construction techniques that created exceptionally durable and effective weapons. These axes featured carefully designed weight distribution that maximized impact force while maintaining balance for repeated use, with decorative elements including geometric patterns and animal motifs that proclaimed the status and achievements of their owners. Spear technology reached new levels of effectiveness during the Yamnaya period, with bronze points displaying advanced metallurgical techniques, including controlled cooling and surface hardening. The socketed construction of Yamnaya spearheads provided superior attachment to wooden shafts, while enabling easy replacement of damaged points, creating weapon systems that combined effectiveness with practical maintainability. Length variations suggest specialized functions, with shorter spears optimized for mounted combat and longer versions designed for infantry formations and hunting large game. The bow and arrow remained important components of Yamnaya military technology, with bone and antler arrowheads showing sophisticated design features optimized for penetration and accuracy. Bronze arrowheads appear in elite contexts, displaying the same metallurgical expertise evident in larger weapons. Composite bow technology utilizing combinations of wood, bone, and sinew provided superior range and power compared to simple wooden bows used by contemporary cultures, enabling Yamnaya archers to engage enemies at distances that provided significant tactical advantages. Defensive equipment evolved to counter the improved offensive capabilities of Yamnaya warfare. Bronze-reinforced shields appear in burial contexts, featuring metal bosses and rim reinforcements that provided protection against bronze weapons, while maintaining manageable weight for mobile combat. Leather armor with bronze studs and plates offered personal protection for elite warriors, while maintaining the flexibility required for horseback riding and rapid movement. The development of these defensive technologies demonstrates the arms race dynamics that characterized Yamnaya warfare, with improvements in offensive capability driving corresponding developments in protective equipment. The social organization that supported Yamnaya military effectiveness centered on warrior brotherhoods that combined religious, military, and economic functions in ways that would shape Indo-European culture for millennia. These groups, possibly related to the later Germanic comitatus tradition, provided training and indoctrination for young males, while serving as the core military force for Yamnaya communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that these warrior bands operated semi-independently, conducting raids and expeditions that extended Yamnaya influence far beyond their core territories. The religious practices associated with Yamnaya warrior culture emphasized martial virtues and the sanctification of violence in service of community expansion. Weapon burials suggest that bronze implements possessed spiritual as well as practical significance, with elaborate rituals surrounding their manufacture, use, and final deposition. The orientation of Kurgan burials toward the east reflects cosmological beliefs that connected the daily rebirth of the sun with concepts of heroic afterlife and eternal warfare, creating religious frameworks that motivated and justified military expansion. The warrior bands that emerged from Yamnaya society represented far more than simple military units. They constituted a fundamental institution that would shape Indo-European culture for millennia, creating patterns of social organization, religious practice, and military effectiveness that can be traced from the Bronze Age steppes to medieval European knightly orders. The Koryos, reconstructed from linguistic evidence across the Indo-European language family, formed the backbone of Proto-Indo-European expansion and conquest, creating elite fighting forces capable of extraordinary feats of warfare and territorial acquisition. These brotherhoods of young men bound by sacred oaths and ritualized violence operated according to principles that transcended ordinary social structures, creating communities within communities that possessed their own laws, customs, and religious practices. The Koryos existed in a liminal space between civilization and wilderness, between youth and adulthood, between human and animal, and this liminality gave them both their power and their danger. They were the shock troops of Indo-European expansion, the advance forces that broke enemy resistance and prepared territories for subsequent colonization by larger populations. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials reveals the material culture associated with these warrior brotherhoods, providing tangible evidence for institutions that might otherwise remain purely hypothetical reconstructions. Excavations at sites like Sintashta and Arkaim have uncovered group burials featuring multiple young males interred with identical weapon sets, suggesting coordinated deaths in battle or ritualized sacrifice. The bronze assemblages from these contexts include matching battle axes, spears, and daggers that display standardized manufacturing techniques and decorative motifs, indicating organized production systems designed to equip warrior bands with consistent high-quality equipment that proclaimed their membership in elite military organizations. The uniformity of these weapon sets demonstrates that Koryos members were equipped through centralized systems rather than individual acquisition, suggesting institutional structures that provided weapons, training, and logistical support for warrior band activities. This standardization also serves symbolic functions, creating visual markers of group membership that distinguished Koryos warriors from ordinary members of society. The matching weapons proclaimed shared identity and mutual obligation, reinforcing the bonds of brotherhood that held these groups together through the dangers and hardships of military campaigns. The linguistic reconstruction of Koryos terminology provides crucial insights into the structure and function of these warrior brotherhoods, revealing an institution that existed across the entire Indo-European world before the major dispersals began. Cognate terms appear across the Indo-European language family, from Germanic Arjaz meaning army or warband, to Celtic Koryos, reflected in Old Irish choir meaning troop or company. Sanskrit kara, and Avastansara preserve related concepts of organized military units, while Greek kouros originally referred to young warriors before acquiring its later meaning of youth. The consistency of this vocabulary across diverse branches demonstrates that warrior brotherhoods constituted a pan-Indo-European institution that predated the major dispersals. The initiation rituals that transformed young men into Kourios members involved elaborate ceremonies designed to separate initiates from ordinary society and bind them to their warrior brothers through shared ordeals and sacred commitments. Comparative analysis of later Indo-European traditions reveals common elements that likely derive from Proto-Indo-European practices, including periods of isolation in wilderness areas, tests of endurance and courage, ritual death and rebirth symbolism, and the assumption of animal characteristics that marked the transformation from civilian to warrior. Germanic sources describe young warriors living apart from settled communities, engaging in ritualized violence and cattle raiding that served both economic and religious functions. These activities were not mere criminality, but sacred duties that demonstrated martial prowess while generating the wealth necessary to support brotherhood activities. Celtic traditions preserve accounts of warrior bands operating under special legal codes that exempted them from normal social obligations while imposing strict internal discipline and loyalty requirements. The consistency of these patterns across diverse Indo-European cultures suggests common origins in Proto-Indo-European practices that were transmitted through the dispersals and maintained for millennia. The wolf symbolism that permeated Kourios culture reflected deep-seated beliefs about the spiritual transformation that occurred during warrior initiation, beliefs that would persist throughout Indo-European history and continue to influence military culture into the modern era. Proto-Indo-European religious concepts associated wolves with death, rebirth, and the liminal spaces between civilization and wilderness, where warrior bands operated. The reconstructed term WLKWOS appears across the language family in contexts relating to both the animal itself and human warriors who adopted wolf characteristics, demonstrating the intimate connection between wolf symbolism and warrior identity. Germanic traditions of berserkers and Ulfhednar preserved these ancient associations, describing warriors who donned wolf pelts and entered trance states that enabled superhuman feats of violence and endurance. These were not merely metaphorical descriptions, but accounts of actual practices involving psychological conditioning, ritual preparations, and possibly psychoactive substances that induced altered states of consciousness. The warriors who underwent these transformations believed themselves to have become wolves, gaining the animal's strength, ferocity, and immunity to pain, while losing the restraints that governed ordinary human behavior. Archaeological evidence supports the central role of wolf symbolism in warrior culture across the Indo-European world. Bronze Age sites have yielded wolf-headed pins, belt fittings, and weapon decorations that proclaimed the wearer's association with wolf powers. Kurgan burials often include wolf teeth and claws as grave goods, while some warrior interments feature complete wolf skeletons positioned alongside human remains. The Sintashta culture provides particularly striking examples, with chariot burials accompanied by wolf and dog sacrifices that suggest beliefs about supernatural companions accompanying warriors into the afterlife. The shape-shifting beliefs associated with Kourios members reflected concepts of spiritual transformation that enabled ordinary young men to become supernatural warriors capable of feats beyond normal human capability. Indo-European mythology preserves numerous accounts of heroes who could assume wolf form, gaining enhanced strength, speed, and ferocity in battle. These traditions likely derive from actual practices involving psychoactive substances, rhythmic dancing, and psychological conditioning that induced altered states of consciousness in which participants experienced themselves as transformed into animals. The archaeological record provides indirect evidence for such practices through the recovery of specialized drinking vessels, ceremonial weapons, and ritual paraphernalia from warrior burial contexts. The presence of these objects suggests elaborate ceremonies that prepared warriors for combat through rituals designed to induce the psychological states associated with berserker fury. The effectiveness of these practices in producing fearless and ferocious fighters explains their persistence across Indo-European cultures and their continued influence on military traditions throughout history. Germanic sources provide the most detailed accounts of wolf warrior traditions that preserve ancient Indo-European elements. The Prose Edda describes berserkers who went without mail coats and acted like mad dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were as strong as bears or bulls. They slew men, but neither fire nor steel bit them. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites includes bear and wolf claws found in warrior graves, along with specialized weapons and ritual objects that support the historical reality of such warrior transformations. The Torslunda helmet plates depict warriors wearing animal masks and engaging in ritualized combat, providing visual evidence for shape-shifting practices that complement the literary descriptions. The cattle raiding that formed a central component of Koryo's activity served multiple functions beyond simple economic gain, combining practical wealth acquisition with religious significance and military training. These expeditions provided training for young warriors, teaching them the skills of stealth, coordination, and combat that would prove essential in larger military operations. The wealth generated through successful raids supported brotherhood activities while demonstrating the martial prowess of participants, establishing reputations that enhanced social status and attracted additional followers. The mobility advantages provided by horses and wheeled vehicles enabled warrior bands to strike targets at considerable distances before retreating to safe territories, creating tactical capabilities that sedentary populations could not match. Archaeological evidence from Bronze Age sites across Europe shows clear signs of violent destruction followed by abandonment, suggesting systematic raiding campaigns that displaced existing populations and cleared territories for Indo-European settlement. The pattern of destruction and abandonment visible in the archaeological record demonstrates the effectiveness of Koryo's warfare in breaking enemy resistance and preparing regions for subsequent colonization. The tactical innovations developed by Koryo's warriors revolutionized Bronze Age warfare and provided decisive advantages over contemporary military systems that had evolved to counter different threats. The combination of mounted archers, chariot-borne fighters, and mobile infantry created flexible formations capable of rapid maneuver and concentrated assault. Excavations at Sintashta have revealed the earliest evidence for spoke-wheeled chariots, representing a quantum leap in military technology that enabled unprecedented speed and mobility on the battlefield. These vehicles featured lightweight construction optimized for warfare rather than transportation, with reinforced floors designed to accommodate fighting crews and specialized fittings for weapon storage. The spoke wheels that replaced earlier solid designs reduced weight while maintaining structural integrity, enabling speeds that solid-wheeled vehicles could not match. The combination of speed, mobility, and striking power made chariot forces the dominant military arm of Bronze Age warfare, establishing patterns that would persist until the development of effective cavalry tactics millennia later. The bronze weapons associated with chariot warfare display sophisticated metallurgical techniques and design features optimized for mounted combat. Spearheads from Santashta contexts feature extended sockets and reinforced necks that prevented breakage during high-impact encounters, while battle axes designed for chariot use incorporated balanced weight distribution and specialized hafting systems that enabled effective use from moving vehicles. The standardization evident in these weapon assemblages suggests organized production systems capable of equipping large military forces with consistent high-quality equipment. Archery equipment reached new levels of sophistication during the chariot period, with composite bow technology enabling unprecedented range and accuracy. Bronze arrowheads from warrior burials display specialized designs optimized for different tactical situations, including broad-headed hunting points, narrow bodkins for penetrating armor, and barbed military heads designed to inflict maximum damage. The quantity of arrows found in individual burials sometimes exceeds 100 specimens, indicating the central importance of archery in Bronze Age warfare and the logistical systems necessary to supply archers with adequate ammunition. The fortified settlements that emerged during the period of Koreos expansion reflect the militarization of Indo-European society and the need for defensive measures against rival warrior bands. Sites like Arkheim and other Santashta settlements feature sophisticated defensive systems, including multiple concentric walls, protected gateways, and internal organization optimized for siege warfare. The circular layout of these settlements enabled coordinated defense, while the central areas provided protected space for chariot storage and warrior training. Archaeological evidence suggests that these fortifications successfully withstood prolonged sieges, with some sites showing evidence for multiple phases of destruction and reconstruction. The sacred oaths that bound Koreos members created relationships that transcended kinship ties and established new forms of social organization based on voluntary association and shared commitment. Comparative analysis of Indo-European oath formulas reveals common elements that likely derive from Proto-Indo-European practices, including invocations of divine witnesses, conditional curses upon oath breakers, and ritual actions that symbolize the binding nature of sworn commitments. These ceremonies involved elaborate rituals designed to invoke divine witness and ensure supernatural punishment for oath breakers, creating bonds that participants believed to be enforced by cosmic powers. The participants in oath ceremonies shed blood, consumed ritual meals, and exchanged weapons or other objects that symbolized their mutual obligations and shared destiny. The blood brotherhood ceremonies that formalized Koreos relationships created artificial kinship ties that often proved stronger than biological family connections, binding warriors together through shared experiences and mutual obligations that superseded other social relationships. Archaeological evidence for these practices includes paired burials featuring young males interred with matching weapon sets and identical grave goods, suggesting relationships that continued beyond death. Some burials show evidence for simultaneous death, suggesting ritualized suicide pacts or shared deaths in battle that honored oath obligations. The elaborate nature of these interments indicates that blood brotherhood relationships received formal recognition and commanded significant respect within Indo-European society. The willingness of warriors to die together, rather than survive alone, demonstrates the intensity of bonds created through Koreos initiation and the effectiveness of oath ceremonies in creating loyalty that transcended individual self-interest. The role of warrior bands in territorial expansion extended beyond simple military conquest to include the establishment of new settlements and the organization of conquered territories. Archaeological evidence suggests that Koreos groups served as advance forces that identified suitable territories eliminated local resistance, and prepared regions for subsequent colonization by larger populations. The pattern of Bronze Age settlement across Europe shows clear evidence for this process, with fortified sites appearing along major river valleys and strategic passes before the establishment of larger agricultural communities. The integration of conquered populations into Indo-European society followed patterns that reflected the values and practices of warrior brotherhoods. Linguistic evidence suggests that local elites who submitted to Indo-European authority could be incorporated into existing social structures through adoption ceremonies and oath rituals that created artificial kinship relationships. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation, with some sites showing gradual transitions in material culture rather than complete replacement of existing traditions. The flexibility of Koryos institutions enabled the absorption of useful local practices while maintaining Indo-European cultural dominance. The religious practices associated with warrior brotherhoods emphasized the sanctification of violence and the transformation of warfare into religious duty. Reconstructed Proto-Indo-European mythology includes numerous accounts of divine warriors who served as models for human Koryos members, establishing patterns of heroic behavior that participants sought to emulate. The god Marios, whose name appears in various forms across the Indo-European language family, represented the archetypal young warrior who achieved glory through martial prowess and died heroically in battle. Archaeological evidence for warrior cults includes specialized weapons deposited in ritual contexts, suggesting that bronze implements possessed sacred as well as practical significance. The seasonal cycles that governed Koryos activities reflected the agricultural calendar and the availability of resources for military campaigns. Comparative evidence suggests that warrior bands operated most actively during late spring and summer months, when travel conditions favored long-distance expeditions and adequate pasture supported large numbers of horses and cattle. Winter months were devoted to training, weapon maintenance, and the performance of religious ceremonies that maintained group cohesion and prepared members for the following campaign season. This seasonal pattern created rhythms of activity that structured the lives of Koryos members and coordinated their activities with the broader agricultural economy. The legacy of Koryos institutions extended far beyond the Bronze Age to influence military organization and warrior culture throughout Indo-European history. Germanic war bands, Celtic warrior societies, and Italic military brotherhoods all preserved elements that can be traced to Proto-Indo-European origins. The Roman military system incorporated oath-taking ceremonies, unit insignia, and disciplinary codes that reflected ancient warrior brotherhood traditions. Medieval knightly orders continued many of the same practices, including ritualized initiation, sacred oaths, and the sanctification of violence in service of religious and social ideals. The mountainous plateau of central Anatolia witnessed the emergence of the first historically documented Indo-European civilization when waves of Anatolian-speaking peoples descended from the Pontic-Caspian steppes during the late 3rd millennium BC. These migrations, distinct from the later waves that would carry other Indo-European branches across Europe and into India, established a series of kingdoms that would dominate Near Eastern politics for over half a millennium. The Hittites, whose cuneiform archives provide our earliest written evidence of Indo-European languages, transformed from nomadic pastoralists into the masters of a sophisticated empire that challenged Egyptian hegemony and revolutionized ancient warfare through innovations in metallurgy, military organization, and diplomatic practice. The significance of the Hittite achievement cannot be overstated. For the first time in human history, we can read the words of Indo-European speakers in their own language, preserved in clay tablets that have survived for over 3,000 years. These archives provide direct evidence for Indo-European grammar, vocabulary, and religious concepts that would otherwise remain purely hypothetical reconstructions. The Hittites demonstrated that Indo-European peoples could not only conquer but also govern sophisticated civilizations, adapting their warrior traditions to the requirements of imperial administration while maintaining the cultural characteristics that distinguish them from their Near Eastern neighbors. Archaeological evidence from sites across central Anatolia reveals the gradual infiltration of Indo-European populations during the transition from the early to Middle Bronze Age. Excavations at Steppe have uncovered Assyrian merchant archives dating to approximately 2000 to 1750 BC that document the presence of Indo-European personal names among local rulers and officials. These cuneiform tablets mention kings with names like Pithana and Anita, clearly Indo-European in origin, governing city-states that had previously been controlled by non-Indo-European Hattian populations. The linguistic analysis of these early documents demonstrates that Anatolian Indo-European languages had already begun diverging into distinct dialects, including Hittite, Luwian, and Palaic, suggesting that the initial migrations occurred several centuries earlier. The material culture associated with these early Anatolian Indo-Europeans displays clear connections to steppe traditions while adapting to local conditions and resources. Bronze weapons from sites like Alaka-Hoyuk include battle axes and spearheads that preserve design elements traceable to Yamnaya prototypes, yet incorporate decorative motifs and manufacturing techniques derived from established Anatolian metalwork traditions. The pottery assemblages show similar patterns of cultural synthesis, with wheel-made vessels displaying shapes and firing techniques characteristic of local traditions, while incorporating cord-marked decorations and geometric patterns that echo steppe ceramic styles. The establishment of Hittite political dominance began during the 17th century BC under kings whose names and deeds are preserved in later historical records. Hattusili I, ruling from the newly constructed capital at Hattusa, launched aggressive campaigns that extended Hittite control across central Anatolia and into northern Syria. His military successes depended heavily on innovations in bronze metallurgy that produced weapons of unprecedented effectiveness. Excavations at Hattusa have revealed extensive workshop areas where specialized smiths manufactured standardized weapon sets for royal armies, demonstrating the organizational capabilities that enabled Hittite military expansion. The bronze implements recovered from these contexts include long swords with complex hilting systems, reinforced spearheads designed for massed infantry formations, and battle axes featuring sophisticated weight distribution that maximized impact force. The standardization evident in these weapon assemblages suggests organized production systems capable of equipping substantial military forces with consistent high-quality equipment. The Hittites had learned to apply the organizational principles of steppe warrior culture to the requirements of imperial warfare, creating military systems that combined Indo-European martial traditions with Near Eastern administrative techniques. The reign of Mursili I marked the zenith of early Hittite expansion, culminating in the audacious campaign that captured and sacked Babylon around 1595 BC. This extraordinary military achievement demonstrated the effectiveness of Hittite tactical innovations and the organizational capabilities that enabled campaigns across vast distances. The Babylonian expedition required coordination of supply lines extending over 1,000 kilometers, management of diverse military units including infantry, chariots, and siege specialists, and diplomatic arrangements with allied states along the route of advance. Contemporary Mesopotamian sources describe the shock and devastation caused by Hittite forces whose bronze weapons and disciplined formations overwhelmed traditional Near Eastern military systems. The development of horse-drawn chariot warfare reached its most sophisticated expression under Hittite military engineers, who transformed these vehicles from simple transportation platforms into devastating weapon systems that dominated Bronze Age battlefields. Archaeological evidence from Hattusa includes chariot remains that demonstrate advanced understanding of weight distribution, structural reinforcement, and aerodynamic design. These vehicles featured lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for maximum speed and maneuverability, and specialized suspension systems that absorbed shocks during high-speed combat. The harness arrangements recovered from royal burials include elaborate bronze fittings that provided precise control over chariot teams while proclaiming the status and wealth of their owners. Hittite chariot tactics revolutionized Bronze Age warfare through the development of coordinated formations that combined shock assault with sustained combat capability. Cuneiform military manuals describe training procedures for chariot crews that emphasize teamwork between drivers and fighters, standardized equipment maintenance, and tactical maneuvers designed to maximize the psychological and physical impact of mass chariot charges. The effectiveness of these innovations is documented in Hittite royal annals that describe victories over Egyptian, Assyrian, and Mesopotamian forces whose traditional military systems proved inadequate against coordinated chariot assaults supported by disciplined infantry formations. The Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BC between Hittite and Egyptian forces, represents the largest chariot battle in recorded history, with thousands of vehicles engaged on both sides. The tactical sophistication displayed by both armies demonstrates the military revolution that chariot warfare had created, transforming the nature of ancient combat and establishing patterns that would persist until the development of effective cavalry tactics. The metallurgical innovations that supported Hittite military supremacy extended beyond weapons production to include the development of iron-working techniques that would eventually transform ancient technology. Archaeological evidence from Hittite sites includes some of the earliest examples of deliberate iron production, with furnaces and slag deposits indicating systematic experimentation with iron smelting procedures. While iron remained expensive and primarily ceremonial during the height of Hittite power, the technological knowledge accumulated during this period provided the foundation for later Iron Age developments that would spread throughout the ancient world. The diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Hittite royal archives reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations that rivaled contemporary civilizations in complexity and effectiveness. The Amarna letters include extensive correspondence between Hittite kings and their Egyptian counterparts, documenting negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. These documents demonstrate that Hittite diplomats possessed detailed knowledge of Egyptian internal politics, military capabilities, and economic resources that enabled effective negotiation strategies. The language used in these diplomatic exchanges reflects formal protocols and ceremonial procedures that acknowledge the equal status of both kingdoms while protecting the interests of their respective rulers. The treaty between Hattusili III and Ramesses II, concluded around 1259 BC, represents one of the earliest documented examples of comprehensive international agreement between major powers. The terms, preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphic and Hittite cuneiform versions, established mutual defense obligations, extradition procedures for political refugees, and commercial arrangements that facilitated trade between the two kingdoms. The elaborate oath ceremonies that formalized this agreement involved religious rituals designed to invoke divine enforcement of treaty obligations, reflecting sophisticated understanding of the supernatural sanctions that supported international law in the ancient world. The linguistic evidence preserved in Hittite cuneiform archives provides crucial insights into early Indo-European grammar, vocabulary, and phonological development that have revolutionized our understanding of the language family. The Hittite language preserves archaic features that had disappeared from other Indo-European branches by the time of their earliest attestation, including the laryngeal consonants that comparative linguists had hypothetically reconstructed for Proto-Indo-European. The discovery of these sounds in actual Hittite words confirmed theoretical predictions and revolutionized understanding of Indo-European phonological evolution. Hittite also preserves ancient grammatical categories, including a distinctive animate-inanimate gender system that differs from the masculine-feminine neuter pattern found in most other Indo-European languages. This archaic feature suggests that the Anatolian branch separated from the main Indo-European trunk at an early date, before the development of the three-gender system that characterizes most other branches. The extensive vocabulary preserved in Hittite texts illuminates numerous aspects of early Indo-European culture and society that would otherwise remain hypothetical reconstructions. Religious terminology includes words for sacrifice, ritual purity, and divine authority that provide direct evidence for Proto-Indo-European religious concepts. Military vocabulary encompasses detailed descriptions of weapons, tactical formations, and siege techniques that demonstrate the sophisticated warfare systems developed by early Indo-European societies. Agricultural and pastoral terms reveal the economic foundations of Hittite society, while preserving ancient Indo-European roots that appear across the language family in various forms. The administrative documents from Hittite archives reveal sophisticated governmental systems that combined Indo-European social organization with administrative techniques adapted from established Near Eastern civilizations. Palace records document complex hierarchies of officials responsible for military organization, religious ceremonies, agricultural management, and diplomatic correspondence. These bureaucratic systems enabled effective control over territories spanning hundreds of thousands of square kilometers while maintaining cultural unity and military effectiveness. The integration of conquered populations followed patterns that preserved Indo-European political dominance while incorporating useful local practices and knowledge systems. The religious practices documented in Hittite ritual texts preserve numerous elements that can be traced to Proto-Indo-European origins, while demonstrating adaptation to Anatolian conditions and influences from neighboring civilizations. The Hittite pantheon included both Indo-European deities, whose names and functions correspond to gods worshipped by other Indo-European peoples, and local Anatolian divinities who were incorporated into royal cult practices. Storm god worship occupied a central position in Hittite religion, with elaborate festivals and sacrificial ceremonies designed to ensure divine support for royal military campaigns and agricultural prosperity. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes at Hattusa reveals sophisticated architectural arrangements that accommodated large-scale religious ceremonies while providing secure storage for ritual implements and sacred texts. The temples featured massive stone construction that proclaimed royal power while creating spaces suitable for the elaborate rituals described in cuneiform texts. The integration of Indo-European religious concepts with Anatolian traditions created syncretic religious systems that maintain cultural continuity while acknowledging the divine powers associated with the land itself. The decline of Hittite power during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC resulted from a combination of internal political instability, external military pressure, and broader regional disruptions associated with the Bronze Age collapse. Archaeological evidence from Hattusa shows clear signs of violent destruction around 1180 BC, with burned buildings, scattered artifacts, and evidence for hasty abandonment that suggests sudden catastrophic defeat. The cuneiform archives end abruptly during this period, providing no contemporary explanation for the kingdom's collapse. However, the broader pattern of destruction across Bronze Age sites throughout the eastern Mediterranean suggests that Hittite civilization fell victim to the same forces that destroyed Mycenaean palaces, Canaanite cities, and other established Bronze Age centers. The sea peoples mentioned in Egyptian sources may have played a role in Hittite collapse, though the exact mechanisms remain debated. Climate change, economic disruption, and internal political conflicts likely contributed to a systemic crisis that overwhelmed the administrative and military capabilities that had sustained Hittite power for centuries. The legacy of Hittite civilization extended far beyond the political boundaries of their empire, through the transmission of technological innovations, diplomatic practices, and cultural traditions that influenced subsequent Near Eastern development. Ironworking techniques developed in Hittite workshops spread throughout Anatolia and beyond, providing the foundation for Iron Age civilizations that would dominate the region for centuries. The diplomatic protocols established in Hittite treaties influenced later international relations, while military innovations including chariot warfare and siege techniques were adopted by successor states throughout the ancient world. The preservation of Indo-European linguistic and cultural elements in later Anatolian populations demonstrates the lasting demographic impact of these early migrations that established the first historically documented Indo-European kingdom. The Hittites proved that Indo-European peoples could build and maintain sophisticated civilizations that rivaled the ancient cultures of Mesopotamia and Egypt, establishing patterns that would be replicated as other Indo-European branches expanded across Eurasia. The collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization around 1900 BC created a demographic vacuum across the northwestern Indian subcontinent that would soon be filled by the most transformative migration in South Asian history. From the Central Asian steppes, where they had established sophisticated Bronze Age cultures centered on fortified settlements like Sintashta and Archaim, Indo-Aryan tribes began their southward movement through the mountain passes of Afghanistan and into the fertile river valleys of the Punjab. These migrations, occurring between approximately 1700 and 1200 BC, brought with them not merely new populations, but an entire cultural complex that would fundamentally reshape the religious, social, and linguistic landscape of the subcontinent for millennia to come. The Indo-Aryan migrations represent one of the most consequential population movements in human history, establishing the cultural foundations that would evolve into the diverse civilizations of South Asia. The languages, religions, and social structures introduced by these migrants would develop into the classical traditions of India, influencing billions of people across thousands of years. Understanding the Indo-Aryan expansion is essential for comprehending the origins of Hinduism, Buddhism, and the caste system, as well as the linguistic diversity that characterizes modern South Asia. Archaeological evidence from sites like Perak in Baluchistan and Gandhara grave culture settlements in the Swat Valley reveals the material signature of these incoming populations. Excavations have uncovered distinctive handmade pottery featuring geometric designs that echo Central Asian ceramic traditions, bronze implements including horse bits and chariot fittings that demonstrate continuity with steppe technological innovations, and evidence for horse domestication in regions where these animals had previously been unknown. The site of Perak, occupied from approximately 1700 to 800 BC, provides a particularly clear sequence showing the gradual introduction of Indo-Aryan material culture alongside evidence for intensive agricultural development and the establishment of permanent settlements optimized for controlling strategic river crossings and trade routes. The Gandhara grave culture, distributed across modern-day northern Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan, represents the clearest archaeological manifestation of early Indo-Aryan presence in South Asia. The distinctive burial practices documented at sites like Timargarha and Katalai feature pit graves containing flexed inhumations accompanied by iron weapons, horse equipment, and pottery assemblages that display clear connections to Central Asian prototypes. These cemeteries, dating from approximately 1600 to 500 BC, reveal a warrior society that maintained many steppe traditions while adapting to subcontinental conditions. The grave goods include iron swords with ring pommel hilts, characteristic of Central Asian weapon traditions, bronze horse bits identical to examples from Sintashta contexts, and ceramic vessels displaying cord-mark decorations that preserve ancient Indo-European ceramic techniques. The presence of horse equipment in burial contexts demonstrates the continued importance of equestrian culture among Indo-Aryan populations, while the warrior orientation of grave goods indicates that martial values remain central to social organization, even as these populations adapted to new environmental conditions. The linguistic evidence preserved in the Rigveda provides unparalleled insights into the worldview, social organization, and religious practices of these early Indo-Aryan populations. Composed during the period between 1500 and 1000 BC, the Rigvedic hymns preserve archaic Sanskrit that retains numerous features, linking it directly to Proto-Indo-European linguistic traditions, while documenting the specific adaptations required for life in South Asian environments. The vocabulary relating to geography, climate, and natural phenomena reveals a population in the process of adapting steppe-derived cultural practices to monsoon agriculture, tropical diseases, and unfamiliar plant and animal species. Terms for specifically South Asian flora and fauna appear alongside preserved Indo-European roots for horses, cattle, and wheeled vehicles that maintain their central importance in Indo-Aryan society. The linguistic evidence demonstrates both continuity with steppe origins and adaptation to new conditions, revealing the dynamic processes through which Indo-Aryan culture evolved during the centuries following initial migration. The preservation of archaic linguistic features in Vedic Sanskrit provides crucial evidence for reconstructing Proto-Indo-European language and culture, making these texts invaluable for comparative linguistics. The Rigvedic descriptions of warfare provide detailed accounts of the military technologies and tactical systems that enabled Indo-Aryan expansion across northern India. The hymns celebrate horse-drawn chariots as the decisive weapons that granted victory over indigenous populations, described as dasas and dasyas. These vehicles, termed ratha in Sanskrit, featured lightweight construction optimized for rapid movement across the plains of northern India. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hastinapura confirms the presence of spoked wheels and chariot fittings that match Rigvedic descriptions, while horse remains from stratified contexts demonstrate the systematic introduction of these animals into regions where they had been previously unknown. The tactical advantages provided by chariot warfare enabled relatively small Indo-Aryan forces to defeat larger indigenous armies that lacked equivalent mobility and striking power. The combination of speed, shock effect, and the psychological impact of unfamiliar technology created decisive advantages that enabled conquest and territorial control. The Rigvedic hymns celebrate the chariot warrior as the ideal of martial excellence, establishing patterns of heroic culture that would persist throughout Indian history. The bronze and early iron weapons described in Rigvedic texts reflect technological traditions derived from Central Asian metallurgical innovations, while incorporating adaptations to local raw material availability and combat requirements. Archaeological assemblages from painted gray ware sites across the Gangetic Plain include iron swords, spearheads, and arrowheads that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of ironworking techniques. These implements display design features optimized for South Asian combat conditions, including longer blades suited to fighting in dense vegetation and specialized point configurations designed to penetrate the cotton armor favored by local populations. The standardization evident in weapon assemblages suggests organized production systems capable of equipping substantial military forces with consistent high-quality equipment. The transition from bronze to iron technology during the later Vedic period provided Indo-Aryan populations with access to more abundant raw materials, while enabling the production of harder and more effective weapons. This technological advantage contributed to continued expansion and the establishment of Indo-Aryan political dominance across increasingly large territories. The social organization documented in early Vedic texts reveals the gradual transformation of steppe tribal structures into the complex hierarchical systems that would characterize classical Indian civilization. The Varna system, as described in later Rigvedic hymns and early Brahmana texts, represents the institutionalization of Indo-European social categories adapted to South Asian conditions and the requirements of governing conquered populations. The Brahmana Varna preserved and adapted the religious specialists who had maintained sacred knowledge and ritual practices during the migrations from Central Asia. The Kshatriya class descended directly from the warrior brotherhoods that had spearheaded Indo-Aryan expansion, retaining their martial traditions while assuming territorial control and administrative responsibilities. The Vaishya category encompassed a broader Indo-Aryan population engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade activities that supported warrior elites and religious establishments. The incorporation of indigenous populations into Indo-Aryan social structures followed patterns that reflected both practical administrative requirements and deeply held beliefs about ritual purity and cultural superiority. The Shudra Varna, as described in later Vedic texts, provided a mechanism for integrating conquered populations while maintaining Indo-Aryan cultural dominance and ensuring access to local knowledge systems essential for successful agricultural adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests that this integration process varied considerably across different regions, with some areas showing gradual cultural synthesis while others display evidence for more abrupt population replacement and cultural transformation. The religious practices preserved in Vedic literature demonstrate remarkable continuity with Proto-Indo-European traditions, while documenting adaptations to South Asian environmental conditions and cultural influences from indigenous populations. The fire sacrifice that formed the centerpiece of Vedic ritual represents a direct continuation of Indo-European sacrificial traditions, with elaborate ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic order and ensure divine support for human activities. The Agnikayana ritual, described in detail in later Vedic texts, required the construction of complex fire altars using precisely calculated numbers of bricks arranged in specific geometric patterns that symbolized cosmic structure and divine authority. The horse sacrifice, or Ashvamedha, described in Rigvedic and later texts, represents the most elaborate expression of Indo-Aryan royal ritual, combining ancient steppe traditions of horse sacrifice with sophisticated ceremonial procedures adapted to subcontinental political requirements. This year-long ceremony began with the release of a specially consecrated stallion, that wandered freely across territories claimed by the sponsoring king. Any ruler whose lands the horse entered faced the choice of submission or warfare, making the Ashvamedha both a religious ceremony and a mechanism for territorial expansion. The ritual culminated in the sacrifice of the horse, alongside elaborate offerings that demonstrated the king's wealth and divine authorization while establishing his authority over conquered territories. The Soma ritual, central to numerous Rigvedic hymns, preserved ancient Indo-European traditions of ritual intoxication while adapting to South Asian plant resources and religious requirements. The identity of the original Soma plant remains disputed, but linguistic and botanical evidence suggests that Indo-Aryan populations were forced to find substitutes for Central Asian psychoactive plants that could not survive in South Asian climates. The elaborate preparation procedures described in Vedic texts, involving pressing, filtering, and mixing with milk and honey, created ceremonial beverages that induced altered states of consciousness essential for communication with divine powers. The pantheon worshipped by early Indo-Aryan populations combined deities whose names and functions can be traced directly to Proto-Indo-European origins, with adaptations reflecting South Asian environmental conditions and possible influences from indigenous religious traditions. Indra, the storm god who served as king of the gods and patron of warriors, represents a direct continuation of the Indo-European storm deity, while acquiring specific characteristics related to monsoon weather patterns and the military requirements of subcontinental conquest. Rigvedic hymns describe Indra's battles against the demon Vritra, who withheld the monsoon rains, reflecting the central importance of seasonal rainfall for South Asian agriculture and the role of royal authority in ensuring agricultural prosperity. Agni, the fire god who served as mediator between human and divine realms, preserved ancient Indo-European fire worship while developing elaborate theological concepts related to sacrifice and cosmic maintenance. The Rigvedic conception of Agni as simultaneously the domestic hearth fire, the sacrificial fire, and the celestial fire that enables divine communication, demonstrates sophisticated religious thinking that built upon Indo-European foundations while addressing South Asian ritual requirements. Archaeological evidence for fire altars at sites across northern India confirms the central importance of fire worship in early Indo-Aryan religious practice, with some installations showing evidence for continuous use over centuries. Varuna, described in early Rigvedic hymns as the sovereign god who maintains cosmic order through divine law, represents another clear continuation of Indo-European religious concepts, while acquiring characteristics specific to South Asian kingship ideologies. The elaborate royal ceremonials described in later Vedic texts, including the Rajasuya and Vajapaya sacrifices, demonstrate the development of sophisticated theories of divine kingship that legitimized Indo-Aryan political authority while incorporating administrative techniques necessary for governing complex agricultural societies. The agricultural adaptations required for successful Indo-Aryan settlement in South Asia involved substantial modifications of steppe pastoral practices, while preserving the cattle-centered economy that had characterized Indo-European society since Proto-Indo-European times. The Rigvedic emphasis on cattle wealth, with cows serving as the primary measure of prosperity and social status, maintained ancient traditions while adapting to South Asian conditions where these animals could be integrated with monsoon agriculture and rice cultivation. Archaeological evidence from painted grayware sites reveals the development of mixed farming systems that combined cattle herding with intensive grain production, creating agricultural surpluses that supported urban development and craft specialization. The iron-working technology that enabled Indo-Aryan agricultural expansion built upon metallurgical knowledge acquired during the Central Asian phase of their cultural development, while incorporating innovations necessary for producing tools suited to South Asian agricultural requirements. Archaeological assemblages from early Iron Age sites across northern India include plowshares, sickles, and other agricultural implements that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of ironworking techniques. The standardization evident in these tool assemblages suggests organized production systems that could supply agricultural communities across vast territories with consistent high-quality equipment essential for intensive farming. The urban centers that emerged during the later Vedic period reflect the successful adaptation of Indo-Aryan social and political organization to South Asian conditions, while preserving essential cultural traditions derived from steppe origins. Sites like Hastinapura and Ahichatra reveal planned settlements featuring defensive fortifications, specialized craft quarters, and monumental architecture that proclaim the authority and prosperity of Indo-Aryan rulers. The archaeological evidence from these urban centers includes extensive workshops for bronze and iron production, pottery manufacturing facilities capable of producing the distinctive painted grayware that characterizes later Vedic material culture, and storage facilities that demonstrate the agricultural surpluses necessary to support non-agricultural populations. The trade networks that connected early Indo-Aryan settlements extended across vast distances, linking South Asian populations with Central Asian, Iranian, and Mesopotamian commercial systems, while facilitating the exchange of raw materials, finished goods, and technological innovations. Archaeological evidence includes Central Asian horses, Afghan lapis lazuli, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals found in South Asian contexts, while South Asian ivory, textiles, and spices appear in sites across Western and Central Asia. These commercial relationships required sophisticated organizational capabilities and diplomatic arrangements that demonstrate the political and economic sophistication achieved by Indo-Aryan societies within centuries of their initial arrival in the subcontinent. The emergence of Celtic civilization from its Hallstatt culture foundations around 800 BC marked the beginning of one of the most dynamic and far-reaching expansions in European prehistory. From their heartland, in the alpine regions of modern Austria, southern Germany, and eastern France, Celtic tribes embarked on migrations that would carry their distinctive culture, languages, and warrior traditions across vast territories, stretching from the Atlantic shores of Ireland to the steppes of Asia Minor. These movements represented not merely demographic shifts, but the transmission of a sophisticated cultural complex that combined advanced metallurgy, elaborate artistic traditions, and religious practices rooted in ancient Indo-European heritage. The Celts represent one of the most influential Indo-European peoples in European history, establishing cultural patterns that would persist for millennia and continue to influence modern societies. Their artistic traditions, religious practices, and social institutions left lasting marks on European civilization, while their languages survive today in Welsh, Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Breton. Understanding Celtic expansion is essential for comprehending the cultural foundations of Western Europe and the processes through which Indo-European traditions adapted to diverse environmental and cultural conditions. Archaeological evidence from the Hallstatt Cemetery itself, with its over 2,000 burials spanning several centuries, reveals the material foundations that enabled subsequent Celtic expansion. The salt mining operations that provided the economic basis for Hallstatt prosperity generated wealth sufficient to support specialized craftsmen, maintain extensive trade networks, and equip warrior elites with bronze and early iron weapons of exceptional quality. Excavations have uncovered elaborate grave goods, including bronze vessels imported from Mediterranean workshops amber ornaments from Baltic sources, and locally produced iron swords that demonstrate the metallurgical expertise that would become characteristic of Celtic civilization. The hierarchical burial patterns, evident at Hallstatt, with wealthy warrior graves containing full weapon sets and imported luxury goods contrasting sharply with simpler interments, establish social structures that would persist throughout the period of Celtic expansion. The concentration of wealth and military capability in the hands of warrior elites created the leadership structures necessary for organizing large-scale migrations and military campaigns. The Hallstatt elite demonstrated that Indo-European warrior traditions could be adapted to the requirements of complex societies engaged in long-distance trade and craft specialization. The transition from Hallstatt to Latene culture around 450 BC coincided with accelerated Celtic migrations and the development of distinctive artistic styles that would become synonymous with Celtic civilization. Named after the votive deposit site on Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland, Latene culture represented a synthesis of indigenous European traditions with influences absorbed through contact with Mediterranean civilizations and continuing connections to steppe nomadic peoples. The artistic revolution that characterized the early Latene period involved the transformation of classical Mediterranean motifs through Celtic aesthetic sensibilities, creating curvilinear designs, stylized animal forms, and geometric patterns that decorated weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial objects with unprecedented sophistication. The metalwork innovations that distinguished Latene craftsmen built upon Hallstatt foundations, while incorporating techniques learned through expanded trade contacts and territorial conquests. Iron production reached new levels of sophistication, with Celtic smiths developing specialized techniques for creating pattern-welded sword blades that combined different iron alloys to produce weapons of exceptional strength and flexibility. Archaeological analysis of Latene swords reveals complex manufacturing processes involving repeated folding and welding of iron bars with varying carbon content, creating blades with hard cutting edges supported by flexible cores that prevented breakage during combat. The decorative inlay work that adorned the finest weapons incorporated bronze, silver, and gold elements, arranged in intricate patterns that proclaimed the status and achievements of their owners. These weapons were not merely functional implements, but works of art that demonstrated the cultural sophistication of Celtic civilization. The combination of technical excellence and artistic achievement in Celtic metalwork established standards that would influence European craft traditions for centuries. In the cold, mist-shrouded forests of northern Europe, where the sun barely penetrated the dense canopy of ancient oaks and pines, another branch of the Indo-European family was quietly growing into a force that would one day reshape the entire Western world. The Germanic peoples, descendants of those same steppe wanderers who had spread across the continent millennia before, had developed a culture uniquely adapted to the harsh northern environment, a culture that would eventually produce the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, and the tribes that would bring the mighty Roman Empire to its knees. The origins of the Germanic peoples can be traced back to the Nordic Bronze Age, roughly 1700 to 500 BCE, when Indo-European migrants merged with the indigenous populations of Scandinavia and the North European plain. This fusion created a distinctive culture that retained many of the core Indo-European traditions while adapting them to the challenging northern climate. The long, dark winters and the constant struggle for survival shaped a people who valued strength, courage, and loyalty above all else, virtues that would define Germanic culture for millennia to come. The Germanic religion, like that of their Indo-European ancestors, was polytheistic and deeply connected to the natural world. At the head of their pantheon stood Woden, known later as Odin, a god of wisdom, war, death, and poetry. Woden was not a distant, benevolent deity, but a complex, often terrifying figure who wandered the world in disguise, seeking knowledge and testing mortals. He had sacrificed his own eye at the well of Mimir to gain cosmic wisdom, and he hung himself on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to learn the secrets of the runes. This image of a god who suffered for knowledge, who embraced pain and sacrifice in pursuit of understanding, reflects the harsh realities of Germanic life and the value placed on wisdom gained through hardship. Beside Woden stood Donar, later known as Thor, the thunder god who wielded the mighty hammer Mjolnir. Where Woden was cunning and mysterious, Donar was straightforward and powerful, a protector of both gods and humans against the forces of chaos. The common people loved Donar more than any other god, for he represented the strength and reliability they needed to survive in a dangerous world. When thunder rolled across the northern skies, the Germanic peoples knew that Donar was riding his chariot through the heavens, doing battle with the giants who threatened the cosmic order. The Germanic concept of fate was perhaps the most distinctive aspect of their worldview. They believed in the weird, an impersonal force that determined the destiny of all beings, gods and mortals alike. The Norns, 3 mysterious women who dwelt at the base of the world tree, wove the threads of fate for every creature in existence. Even the gods could not escape their appointed doom, for the Germanic peoples believed that the universe itself was destined to end in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the forces of chaos would finally overwhelm the forces of order, and the world would be consumed in fire and flood. This belief in an inevitable cosmic catastrophe gave Germanic culture a distinctive fatalistic quality. If even the gods were doomed, what hope did mortals have? Yet rather than leading to despair, this fatalism produced a fierce determination to live with honor and courage, to face death bravely when it came, and to leave behind a reputation that would outlast one's mortal life. The Germanic warrior did not fight to avoid death, but to earn a glorious death, one that would be remembered in songs and stories for generations to come. The social structure of Germanic society was based on the comitatus, a band of warriors bound by personal loyalty to a chieftain or king. This institution, which the Romans called the comitatus and the Germanic peoples knew by various names, was the fundamental unit of Germanic political organization. A lord provided his followers with weapons, armor, food, and shelter, while the warriors pledged their absolute loyalty, even unto death. To flee from battle while one's lord still fought was the ultimate disgrace, a shame that could never be erased. This bond between lord and follower would later evolve into the feudal relationships that defined medieval European society. The Germanic peoples were also renowned for their love of poetry and storytelling. In a culture without writing, the spoken word was the primary means of preserving history, law, and religious knowledge. The skop, or poet, held a position of great honor in Germanic society, for it was he who remembered the deeds of heroes and the wisdom of ancestors. The alliterative verse form used by Germanic poets, with its complex patterns of stressed syllables and repeated sounds, was designed to aid memorization and to give the words a hypnotic, almost magical quality. When a skop recited the tales of ancient heroes in the flickering firelight of a mead hall, his audience was transported to another world, a world of gods and monsters, of courage and treachery, of glory and doom. The expansion of Germanic peoples across Europe began in earnest during the late Roman period, driven by a combination of population pressure, climate change, and the magnetic pull of Roman wealth. The migration period, roughly 300 to 700 CE, saw wave after wave of Germanic tribes moving across the continent, sometimes as invaders, sometimes as refugees, sometimes as mercenaries in Roman service. The Goths, both Visigoths and Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Burgundians, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Lombards, All of these peoples participated in the great reshuffling of populations that transformed the Roman world into medieval Europe. The Goths were among the first Germanic peoples to make a major impact on the Roman Empire. Originally from Scandinavia, they had migrated to the shores of the Black Sea by the 3rd century CE, where they established powerful kingdoms that threatened Roman territory. The Goths were divided into two main groups, the Visigoths in the west and the Ostrogoths in the east. Both groups would play crucial roles in the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the creation of the medieval world. The Visigoths' entry into the Roman Empire in 376 CE marked a turning point in European history. Fleeing from the Huns, a terrifying nomadic people from the Central Asian steppes, the Visigoths sought refuge within Roman territory. The Romans, seeing an opportunity to gain new soldiers and taxpayers, allowed them to cross the Danube. But Roman officials treated the refugees with contempt and cruelty, selling them dog meat at exorbitant prices and even taking their children as slaves. The Visigoths, proud warriors who had expected to be treated as allies, rose in rebellion. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE was one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history. The Emperor Valens himself led the Roman army against the Visigothic forces, confident in the superiority of Roman arms. But the Gothic cavalry, returning from a foraging expedition at the crucial moment, caught the Roman infantry in a devastating charge. The Roman army was annihilated, and Valens himself was killed. His body never recovered from the carnage. Adrianople demonstrated that the Germanic peoples were no longer mere barbarians to be easily defeated, but formidable military powers capable of destroying Roman armies in open battle. The Visigoths continued to be a thorn in Rome's side for the next 3 decades, sometimes fighting against the empire, sometimes serving as its allies. Under their king Alaric, they invaded Italy itself, demanding land and recognition. When negotiations failed, Alaric did the unthinkable. In 410 CE, his forces sacked the city of Rome, the first time the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The psychological impact of this event was enormous. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, lamented that the city which had conquered the world had itself been conquered. St. Augustine began writing his masterpiece, The City of God, partly in response to pagan claims that Rome had fallen because it had abandoned its traditional gods. The Ostrogoths, meanwhile, had been subjugated by the Huns and forced to serve as their vassals. When the Hunnic Empire collapsed after the death of Attila in 453 CE, the Ostrogoths regained their independence and eventually established a powerful kingdom in Italy under their great king Theodoric. Theodoric, who had been raised as a hostage in Constantinople and educated in Roman ways, sought to preserve Roman civilization while ruling as a Germanic king. His reign, from 493 to 526 CE, represented a remarkable attempt to fuse Roman and Germanic cultures, to create a new synthesis that would preserve the best of both worlds. The Vandals took a different path, one that would make their very name synonymous with destruction. Originating in what is now Poland, they migrated westward under pressure from other tribes, crossing the Rhine on the frozen river in the winter of 406 CE, along with the Alans and the Suebi. They swept through Gaul and into Spain, eventually crossing to North Africa, where they established a kingdom centered on the wealthy city of Carthage. From their African base, the Vandals became the terror of the Mediterranean, their fleets raiding the coasts of Italy, Sicily, and Greece. In 455 CE, they sacked Rome itself, stripping the city of its treasures with a thoroughness that shocked even their contemporaries. The Franks would prove to be the most successful of all the Germanic peoples in building a lasting kingdom on Roman soil. Unlike the Goths and Vandals, who had migrated long distances before settling, the Franks expanded gradually from their homeland along the Lower Rhine, absorbing Roman territory piece by piece. Under their king Clovis, who ruled from 481 to 511 CE, the Franks united most of Gaul under their control and, crucially, converted to Catholic Christianity rather than the Arian Christianity favored by most other Germanic peoples. This conversion won the Franks the support of the Roman Church and the Gallo-Roman aristocracy, giving them a legitimacy that other Germanic kingdoms lacked. The Frankish kingdom would eventually evolve into the Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne, who was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day, 800 CE. This moment marked the symbolic restoration of the Western Roman Empire, now transformed into a Germanic Christian realm. Charlemagne's empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Elbe, from the North Sea to central Italy, encompassing most of Western Europe. Though his empire would fragment after his death, it established the political and cultural foundations of medieval Europe, including the close alliance between church and state that would define Western Christendom for centuries. In Britain, the Germanic migrations took a particularly dramatic form. The Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, invited by the Romano-British as mercenaries to help defend against Pictish and Scottish raids, eventually turned on their employers and conquered most of what is now England. The native Britons were pushed to the margins, to Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany, while the Anglo-Saxons established a series of kingdoms that would eventually unite into the Kingdom of England. The English language itself is a Germanic tongue, descended from the dialects spoken by these 5th century invaders, though heavily influenced by later Norse and Norman French additions. The Germanic impact on European culture extended far beyond politics and language. Germanic legal traditions, with their emphasis on personal honor, blood feuds, and trial by ordeal, merged with Roman law to create the hybrid legal systems of medieval Europe. Germanic artistic styles, with their intricate interlacing patterns and stylized animal forms, influenced Christian art throughout the early medieval period. Germanic social structures, particularly the bond between lord and follower, evolved into the feudal system that organized medieval society. Even the days of the week in English preserve the names of Germanic gods: Tuesday for W, Wednesday for Woden, Thursday for Thunor, Friday for Frege. The Vikings, who burst upon the European scene in the late 8th century, represented a final flowering of Germanic warrior culture. These Scandinavian raiders, traders, and settlers spread across the known world, from Newfoundland to Constantinople, from Greenland to Baghdad. They established kingdoms in England, Ireland, Normandy, Sicily, and Russia. They discovered America 5 centuries before Columbus. They served as the elite Varangian guard of the Byzantine emperors. The Viking Age, lasting roughly from 793 to 1066 CE, was the last great chapter in the story of Germanic expansion, before the Scandinavian peoples were fully absorbed into Christian European civilization. The legacy of the Germanic peoples is woven into the very fabric of Western civilization. The languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people, English, German, Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, are all descended from the tongue of those ancient forest dwellers. The political institutions of modern democracies, with their emphasis on individual rights and the rule of law, owe much to Germanic traditions of assembly and consent. The literature of the West, from Beowulf to the Lord of the Rings, draws on Germanic myths and legends. Even the Christmas tree, that ubiquitous symbol of the holiday season, has its roots in Germanic winter festivals. The shadows in the northern forests have stretched across the centuries, shaping the world we live in today. The Roman Empire represents perhaps the greatest achievement of Indo-European civilization. a political and cultural synthesis that united the Mediterranean world and beyond under a single system of law, language, and administration. The Romans were themselves an Indo-European people, their Latin language a cousin to Greek, Sanskrit, and the Celtic and Germanic tongues. But what made Rome unique was its extraordinary capacity for absorption and adaptation, its ability to take the best from every culture it encountered and forge it into something new and powerful. The origins of Rome are shrouded in legend, but the archaeological evidence suggests that the city began as a small settlement of Latin-speaking Indo-Europeans on the hills overlooking the Tiber River, sometime in the 8th century BCE. The Latins were one of several Italic peoples who had migrated into the Italian peninsula during the 2nd millennium BCE, part of the same great Indo-European expansion that had spread these peoples across Europe and Asia. The early Romans were farmers and herders, living in simple huts and worshipping gods of field and forest, sky and storm. The Roman religion, in its earliest form, was a typical Indo-European polytheism, with a sky father Jupiter at its head, corresponding to the Greek Zeus, the Sanskrit Dios Pitar, and the Germanic Tiwaz. Mars, the god of war, was second only to Jupiter in importance, reflecting the martial values that would define Roman culture. Quirinus, a mysterious deity associated with the Roman people themselves, completed the original triad of major gods. As Rome grew and came into contact with other cultures, particularly the Greeks and Etruscans, its religion became increasingly elaborate, absorbing foreign deities and practices, while maintaining its distinctive Roman character. The Roman social structure was rigidly hierarchical, divided between the patricians, the old aristocratic families who claimed descent from the original founders of the city, and the plebeians, the common people who made up the majority of the population. This division, which would be a source of conflict for centuries, reflected the Indo-European pattern of social stratification, though the Romans eventually developed mechanisms for social mobility that were unusual in the ancient world. A talented and ambitious plebeian could rise to the highest offices of the state, though the path was never easy. The Roman Republic, established according to tradition in 509 BCE after the expulsion of the last Etruscan king, was a complex system of checks and balances designed to prevent any single individual or faction from gaining too much power. 2 consuls, elected annually, shared executive authority. The Senate, composed of former magistrates, provided advice and controlled finances. Various popular assemblies gave the common people a voice in government. This system, though far from democratic by modern standards, proved remarkably effective at channeling Roman energies toward expansion and conquest. The Roman military was the engine of this expansion, a disciplined professional force that eventually conquered the entire Mediterranean world and beyond. The Roman legion, with its flexible tactical system and rigorous training, was the most effective military organization the ancient world had ever seen. Roman soldiers were not merely warriors but engineers, builders, and administrators, capable of constructing roads, bridges, and fortifications that would last for centuries. The Roman road network, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, was one of the great engineering achievements of antiquity, facilitating trade, communication, and the rapid movement of troops. The Punic Wars against Carthage, fought between 264 and 146 BCE, transformed Rome from a regional Italian power into the dominant force in the Western Mediterranean. The First War gave Rome control of Sicily, its first overseas province. The Second War, featuring the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal and his crossing of the Alps with war elephants, nearly destroyed Rome but ultimately demonstrated the Republic's extraordinary resilience. The Third War ended with the complete destruction of Carthage, its population sold into slavery and its fields sown with salt. Rome now controlled the western Mediterranean, and its eyes turned eastward. The conquest of the Greek world brought Rome into contact with a civilization that was in many ways more sophisticated than its own. The Romans, practical and pragmatic, were awed by Greek philosophy, art, literature, and science. They absorbed Greek culture wholesale, adapting it to their own needs and sensibilities. Roman aristocrats learned Greek, read Greek literature, and employed Greek tutors for their children. Greek gods were identified with their Roman counterparts. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Athena became Minerva. Greek artistic styles influenced Roman sculpture and architecture. Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism and Epicureanism, shaped Roman thought. Yet the Romans were not mere imitators. They took Greek ideas and transformed them, creating something distinctively Roman. Roman architecture, while drawing on Greek models, developed new techniques such as the arch, the vault, and the dome that allowed for structures of unprecedented size and complexity. The Pantheon, with its massive concrete dome, remains one of the most impressive buildings ever constructed. Roman engineering produced aqueducts that brought fresh water to cities, sewers that carried away waste, and public baths that served as social centers. Roman law, codified and systematized over centuries, became the foundation of legal systems throughout Europe and beyond. The transformation of the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire was a gradual process, driven by the strains of governing an ever-expanding territory and the ambitions of powerful individuals. The last century of the Republic was marked by civil wars, political violence, and the rise of military strongmen who commanded the loyalty of their troops more than the state. Julius Caesar, the brilliant general who conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, was assassinated by senators who feared he would make himself king. His adopted heir Octavian, later known as Augustus, emerged victorious from the subsequent civil wars and established a new political system that preserved the forms of the Republic while concentrating real power in his own hands. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that followed Augustus's victory lasted for over 2 centuries, from 27 BCE to 180 CE. This was an era of unprecedented prosperity and stability for the Mediterranean world. Trade flourished along secure sea lanes and well-maintained roads. Cities grew and prospered, adorned with temples, theaters, baths, and forums. The population of the empire may have reached 60 million or more, a level not seen again in Europe until the 18th century. Latin became the common language of the western provinces, while Greek dominated the east. A person could travel from Britain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Sahara, and everywhere find Roman law, Roman administration, and Roman culture. The Roman Empire was remarkably diverse, encompassing peoples of every ethnicity, language, and religion. Romans, Greeks, Egyptians, Syrians, Gauls, Britons, Germans, Africans, all were subjects of the emperor, and all could aspire to Roman citizenship. The Emperor Caracalla, in 212 CE, extended citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, a remarkable act of inclusion that had no parallel in the ancient world. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge, for the empire had to find ways to maintain unity among peoples with vastly different traditions and interests. Religion was one area where Roman tolerance was tested. The Romans were generally accepting of foreign gods, readily incorporating them into their own pantheon, or identifying them with existing Roman deities, but they expected all subjects to participate in the imperial cult, offering sacrifices to the emperor as a sign of political loyalty. This requirement brought them into conflict with Jews and Christians, who refused to worship any god but their own. The Jewish revolts of 66 to 73 and 132 to 135 CE resulted in the destruction of the Jerusalem temple and the dispersal of the Jewish people. The persecution of Christians, sporadic at first, became more systematic in the 3rd century as the empire faced mounting crises. The 3rd century was a time of troubles for the Roman Empire, marked by civil wars, barbarian invasions, economic collapse, and plague. Between 235 and 284 CE, over 50 men claimed the imperial title, most of them dying violent deaths after brief reigns. The frontiers were breached repeatedly by Germanic tribes in the west and the resurgent Persian Empire in the east. Cities shrank behind hastily constructed walls, trade declined, and the currency was debased. It seemed that the empire might collapse entirely, fragmenting into regional kingdoms as the Bronze Age civilizations had done 1,000 years before. The empire was saved, at least temporarily, by a series of strong emperors who restored order and reformed the administration. Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305 CE, reorganized the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by an emperor and a junior colleague. He reformed the tax system, stabilized the currency, and strengthened the frontiers. Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 CE, went further, founding a new capital at Constantinople on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, and converting to Christianity, transforming the persecuted faith into the favored religion of the state. Constantine's conversion was one of the most consequential events in world history. Christianity, which had begun as a small Jewish sect in Palestine, had spread throughout the empire despite periodic persecution, appealing to slaves and aristocrats, men and women, Greeks and barbarians. Its message of salvation, its promise of eternal life, its emphasis on love and charity, resonated with people seeking meaning in an uncertain world. Now, with imperial support, Christianity rapidly became the dominant religion of the Roman world, absorbing and transforming classical culture in the process. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last emperor Romulus Augustulus, was less a sudden catastrophe than the culmination of a long process of transformation. The Germanic peoples who took over the western provinces were not destroyers of Roman civilization but its heirs, eager to preserve what they could of Roman law, administration, and culture. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call Byzantium, continued for another 1,000 years, preserving and transmitting the classical heritage to future generations. The Roman legacy is incalculable. The Romance languages, spoken by hundreds of millions of people, are descended from Latin. Roman law forms the basis of legal systems throughout Europe and Latin America. Roman architecture, with its arches, domes, and columns, has been imitated for 2,000 years. Roman literature, from Virgil's Aeneid to Ovid's Metamorphoses, remains central to the Western canon. The Roman Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome itself, preserves not only the Christian faith, but also much of Roman organizational structure and Latin liturgical language. The very idea of a universal civilization, transcending ethnic and linguistic boundaries, is a Roman idea, one that has inspired empires and international organizations ever since. The Romans were the great synthesizers of the ancient world, taking the achievements of Greeks, Etruscans, Egyptians, and others, and forging them into a coherent whole. They were also the great transmitters, passing on the accumulated wisdom of antiquity to the medieval and modern worlds. When we speak of Western civilization, we are speaking largely of the Roman inheritance, filtered through Christianity and enriched by Germanic, Celtic, and other traditions. The Indo-European peoples who had once wandered the Pontic steppe had, through their Roman descendants, created a civilization that would shape the entire world. The Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European family represents one of the most significant and enduring cultural traditions in human history, stretching from the highlands of Iran to the plains of the Ganges, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the shores of the Bay of Bengal. The Indo-Iranian peoples created civilizations of extraordinary depth and sophistication. Their religious and philosophical traditions, from Zoroastrianism to Hinduism to Buddhism, have shaped the spiritual lives of billions of people across millennia. The Indo-Iranians were originally a single people, speaking a common language and sharing a common culture, who lived somewhere in the steppes of Central Asia during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE. They called themselves Arya, a word meaning noble or honorable, which survives in the names of both Iran, from Aryanum, land of the Aryans, and in various Indian contexts. Their society was organized along typical Indo-European lines, with priests, warriors, and commoners, and their religion centered on the worship of natural forces, personified as gods. The Indo-Iranian religion, reconstructed from the earliest texts of both traditions, was a complex polytheism with strong ethical dimensions. The gods were divided into two classes: the Devas, associated with natural phenomena like sky, sun, and storm, and the Asuras, associated with cosmic order and moral law. Fire, called Agni in Sanskrit and Atar in Avestan, was central to worship, serving as the intermediary between humans and gods. The sacred drink soma, pressed from a plant whose identity is still debated, was consumed in rituals and offered to the gods, inducing visions and ecstatic states. The separation of the Indo-Iranians into distinct Iranian and Indo-Aryan branches occurred sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. What is remarkable is that the two traditions, while developing in different directions, retained enough similarities that scholars can reconstruct their common heritage. The Rigveda of India and the Avesta of Iran, though composed centuries apart and reflecting very different religious developments, share vocabulary, poetic forms, and mythological themes that point to their common origin. The Iranians moved westward and southward, eventually settling in the Iranian plateau and surrounding regions. They developed a distinctive religious tradition that would culminate in Zoroastrianism, one of the world's first monotheistic or dualistic religions. Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, a prophet who lived sometime between 1500 and 500 BCE, reformed the traditional Indo-Iranian religion, elevating Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, to the position of supreme deity and reinterpreting the old gods as either aspects of Ahura Mazda or as demons opposed to him. Zoroastrianism introduced concepts that would profoundly influence later religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The idea of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, with Ahura Mazda representing truth and light, and Angra Mainyu representing falsehood and darkness, gave human life a moral significance it had lacked in earlier polytheistic systems. The belief in a final judgment, when the dead would be resurrected and sorted into the blessed and the damned, provided a framework for understanding death and the afterlife. The expectation of a savior figure, the Saoshyant, who would appear at the end of time to defeat evil and establish a perfect world, anticipated later messianic traditions. The Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, was the first world empire, stretching from Egypt to India, from the Aegean to Central Asia. The Persians were Zoroastrians, and their empire was infused with Zoroastrian values of truth, justice, and good governance. Cyrus himself, was celebrated for his tolerance and benevolence, freeing the Jews from their Babylonian captivity and allowing them to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. The Persian administrative system, with its satrapies, royal roads, and postal service, set the standard for imperial governance that later empires would emulate. The Achaemenid Empire fell to Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, but Persian culture and identity survived. The Parthian and Sasanian empires that followed maintained the Zoroastrian tradition and Persian imperial ideology, often in conflict with the Roman and Byzantine empires to the west. The Sasanian period, from 224 to 651 CE, was a golden age of Persian culture, producing magnificent art, architecture, and literature. The Sasanian court was a center of learning, where Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge mingled and cross-fertilized. The Arab conquest of Persia in the 7th century CE brought Islam to the Iranian world, but it did not erase Persian identity. The Persians converted to Islam but retained their language, their literature, and much of their cultural heritage. Persian became the language of high culture throughout the Eastern Islamic world, from Anatolia to India. Persian poetry, from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh to the mystical verses of Rumi and Hafez, ranks among the greatest literary achievements of humanity. Persian art, architecture, and music influenced cultures from Morocco to Indonesia. The Indo-Aryans, meanwhile, had moved southward through the passes of the Hindu Kush into the Indian subcontinent. Their arrival, sometime around 1500 BCE, marked the beginning of the Vedic period, named after the Vedas, the sacred texts that preserved the earliest Indo-Aryan religious traditions. The Rig Veda, the oldest of these texts, is a collection of over 1,000 hymns addressed to the gods, composed in an archaic form of Sanskrit that is closely related to the language of the Avesta. The Vedic religion was a sacrificial cult centered on the fire altar, where priests offered oblations to the gods in exchange for blessings of prosperity, victory, and long life. The gods of the Rig Veda are personifications of natural forces. Indra, the storm god and king of the gods, who slays the dragon Vritra to release the waters. Agni, the fire god, who carries offerings to heaven. Surya, the sun god, who rides his chariot across the sky. Varuna, the god of cosmic order, who upholds the moral law. The rituals were elaborate and precise, requiring specialized knowledge that was jealously guarded by the Brahmin priestly class. Over the centuries, Vedic religion evolved into what we now call Hinduism, a complex and diverse tradition that defies simple definition. The Upanishads, philosophical texts composed between 800 and 400 BCE, shifted the focus from external ritual to internal spiritual experience, developing concepts like Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all existence, and Atman, the individual soul that is ultimately identical with Brahman. The goal of spiritual life became moksha, liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, achieved through knowledge, devotion, or disciplined action. The caste system, which became a defining feature of Indian society, has its roots in the Indo-European tripartite social structure, though it developed in India into something far more elaborate and rigid. The four Varnas, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, corresponding roughly to priests, warriors, commoners, and servants, were supplemented by thousands of jatis, occupational groups that determined one's place in society from birth. This system, whatever its original rationale, became a source of profound inequality and suffering, though it also provided a framework for social organization that persisted for millennia. Buddhism and Jainism, which emerged in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, represented challenges to Vedic orthodoxy from within Indian culture. Both traditions rejected the authority of the Vedas and the supremacy of the Brahmin class, offering alternative paths to spiritual liberation. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, taught that suffering arises from desire and attachment, and that liberation comes through following the eightfold path of right understanding, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, taught an extreme form of non-violence and asceticism as the path to liberation. Buddhism spread far beyond India, becoming the dominant religion of much of Asia. It traveled along the Silk Road to China, Korea, and Japan, adapting to local cultures while retaining its core teachings. It spread southward to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, where Theravada Buddhism remains the predominant tradition. It spread northward to Tibet and Mongolia, where it merged with indigenous shamanic traditions to create the distinctive Vajrayana form. Today, Buddhism has hundreds of millions of adherents worldwide and has become increasingly influential in the West. The Indo-Iranian continuum thus represents a vast and varied cultural tradition, united by common linguistic and religious roots, but diversified by millennia of separate development. From the fire temples of ancient Persia to the Hindu temples of Tamil Nadu, from the Buddhist monasteries of Tibet to the Sikh gurdwaras of Punjab, the descendants of those Central Asian nomads have created some of humanity's most profound spiritual traditions. Their influence extends far beyond the regions where Indo-Iranian languages are spoken, shaping the religious and philosophical thought of the entire world. Language is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a gift that has shaped human thought and communication for over 5,000 years. The Indo-European language family, with its 3 billion native speakers, is the largest and most widespread language family on Earth. From the westernmost shores of Ireland to the easternmost reaches of Bangladesh, from the Arctic tundra of Scandinavia to the tropical islands of Sri Lanka, Indo-European languages dominate the linguistic landscape of the modern world. The discovery of the Indo-European language family was one of the great intellectual achievements of the 18th and 19th centuries. When Sir William Jones, a British judge serving in Calcutta, observed in 1786 that Sanskrit bore a striking resemblance to Greek and Latin, he set in motion a revolution in linguistic thought. Jones proposed that these languages, along with Gothic, Celtic, and Persian, had sprung from a common source, perhaps no longer extant. This insight launched the field of comparative linguistics and eventually led to the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European, the hypothetical ancestor of all Indo-European languages. The methods of comparative linguistics are rigorous and scientific, based on the observation that languages change in regular, predictable ways. Sound changes, in particular, follow consistent patterns that allow linguists to trace the relationships between languages and reconstruct earlier forms. The famous Grimm's Law, formulated by Jacob Grimm of fairy tale fame, describes the systematic sound shifts that distinguish Germanic languages from other Indo-European branches. For example, the Proto-Indo-European P became F in Germanic, which is why Latin pater corresponds to English father, and Latin piscis corresponds to English fish. The reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European vocabulary provides a window into the world of its speakers. Words for family relationships, father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, reveal a patriarchal society with extended family structures. Words for animals, horse, cow, sheep, dog, wolf, bear, indicate a pastoral economy supplemented by hunting. Words for natural phenomena, sky, sun, moon, water, fire, snow, reflect the environment of the temperate steppe. Words for technology, wheel, axle, yoke, weave, suggest a people familiar with wheeled vehicles in textile production. Words for social organization, king, tribe, guest, indicate a hierarchical society with established customs of hospitality. The spread of Indo-European languages across such a vast area is one of the great puzzles of prehistory. How did a language spoken by a relatively small population on the Pontic-Caspian steppe come to dominate most of Europe and large parts of Asia? The answer lies in a combination of factors: the mobility provided by horse domestication and wheeled vehicles, the military advantages of bronze weapons and later chariots, the demographic impact of diseases to which steppe populations had developed immunity, and the social prestige associated with Indo-European warrior culture. The branching of the Indo-European family tree began as groups of speakers migrated in different directions and lost contact with each other. The Anatolian branch, including Hittite, was probably the first to separate, perhaps as early as 4000 BCE. The Tocharian branch, attested in texts from the Tarim Basin in western China, represents another early separation. The remaining branches, Indo-Iranian, Greek, Armenian, Albanian, Celtic, Italic, Germanic, Baltic, and Slavic, diverged over the following millennia, each developing its own distinctive characteristics while retaining the core features of the Indo-European inheritance. The Celtic languages, once spoken across much of Europe from Ireland to Anatolia, have retreated to the western fringes of the continent. Irish, Scottish Gaelic, Welsh, and Breton survive today, maintained by dedicated speakers and supported by government policies, but they face an uncertain future in a world dominated by English and other major languages. The Celtic contribution to European culture, however, extends far beyond the regions where Celtic languages are still spoken, influencing art, music, literature, and mythology throughout the Western world. The Italic branch gave rise to Latin, which in turn spawned the Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, Romanian, and others. The spread of Latin was initially a result of Roman conquest, but it was the prestige of Roman civilization and the influence of the Catholic Church that ensured its lasting impact. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Latin remained the language of learning, religion, and diplomacy in Western Europe for over 1,000 years. The Romance languages emerged gradually, as spoken Latin diverged in different regions, eventually becoming distinct languages in their own right. The Germanic languages, including English, German, Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages, descend from the speech of tribes who lived in northern Europe during the first millennium BCE. The Germanic peoples were relatively late to adopt writing, so our knowledge of early Germanic comes mainly from runic inscriptions and from the observations of Roman authors like Tacitus. The Great Vowel Shift, a series of changes in English pronunciation that occurred between 1400 and 1700, is one reason why English spelling is so notoriously irregular, preserving older pronunciations that no longer match the spoken language. English itself is a remarkable linguistic hybrid, a Germanic language that has absorbed massive amounts of vocabulary from French, Latin, Greek, and other sources. The Norman conquest of 1066 brought French-speaking rulers to England, and for centuries French was the language of the court, the law, and high culture, while English remained the language of the common people. The result is a language with an unusually rich vocabulary, often having multiple words for the same concept. Germanic begin alongside French commence and Latin initiate. Germanic freedom alongside French liberty. The Slavic languages, including Russian, Polish, Czech, Serbian, and Ukrainian, are spoken by over 300 million people across Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. The Slavic peoples expanded from their homeland in what is now Poland and Ukraine during the early medieval period, eventually occupying a vast territory from the Elbe to the Pacific. The Cyrillic alphabet, used for Russian, Bulgarian, Serbian, and other Slavic languages, was developed in the 9th century by Byzantine missionaries to facilitate the translation of Christian texts. The Indo-Iranian branch, as we have seen, includes both the Iranian languages, Persian, Kurdish, Pashto, and others, and the Indo-Aryan languages, Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, Marathi, and many more. With over 1 billion speakers, the Indo-Aryan languages alone constitute one of the largest language groups in the world. The literary traditions of these languages, from the ancient Sanskrit epics to modern Hindi cinema, represent some of humanity's greatest cultural achievements. Greek, though spoken by a relatively small population today, has had an outsized influence on Western civilization. The Greek alphabet, adapted from Phoenician, became the ancestor of the Latin, Cyrillic, and other alphabets. Greek philosophy, science, and literature formed the foundation of Western intellectual culture. Greek loanwords permeate the vocabularies of European languages, especially in technical and scientific fields. Even the word alphabet itself comes from the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta. The Baltic languages, Lithuanian and Latvian, are notable for their conservatism, preserving features of Proto-Indo-European that have been lost in other branches. Lithuanian, in particular, is often cited as the living Indo-European language, most similar to the reconstructed Proto-language. This conservatism makes the Baltic languages invaluable for comparative linguistics, providing evidence for features of Proto-Indo-European that might otherwise be unrecoverable. Albanian, spoken in Albania and Kosovo, is the sole survivor of its branch of the Indo-European family. Its origins are obscure, and scholars debate whether it descends from ancient Illyrian, Thracian, or some other Balkan language. Armenian, similarly, is the sole survivor of its branch, spoken in Armenia and by diaspora communities worldwide. Both languages have been heavily influenced by neighboring languages, but retain their Indo-European core. The global dominance of Indo-European languages today is largely a result of European colonialism. English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Russian spread across the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania as European powers established empires around the world. English, in particular, has become the global lingua franca, the language of international business, science, technology, and popular culture. This dominance raises important questions about linguistic diversity and the survival of minority languages, many of which are endangered or already extinct. The study of Indo-European languages continues to yield new insights into human prehistory and the nature of language itself. Advances in genetics, archaeology, and computational linguistics are refining our understanding of when and how the Indo-European languages spread. The reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European, once a purely linguistic exercise, is now being integrated with evidence from other disciplines to create a more complete picture of the people who spoke it. The words we speak today, in languages from English to Hindi to Russian to Persian, carry within them the echoes of those ancient steppe dwellers, a linguistic legacy that has truly conquered the world. The mythology of the Indo-European peoples represents one of humanity's great imaginative achievements, a vast tapestry of gods, heroes, monsters, and cosmic dramas that has shaped religious thought and literary tradition across cultures and millennia. From the thundering sky gods of the ancient world to the dragon-slaying heroes of medieval legend, from the creation myths that explain the origin of the cosmos to the apocalyptic visions that foretell its end, Indo-European mythology provides a window into the deepest concerns and highest aspirations of the human spirit. The reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European mythology is a challenging but rewarding endeavor, requiring the careful comparison of myths from widely separated cultures to identify common themes and figures. When we find the same story told in India and Iceland, in Greece and Ireland, we can be confident that it derives from a common source, preserved and transformed over thousands of years of separate development. The myths that emerge from this comparison reveal a coherent worldview, a way of understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it that was shared by the ancestors of half the world's population. At the center of Indo-European mythology stands the Sky Father, known by various names in different traditions, but always recognizable as the supreme deity of the heavens. In Sanskrit, he is Dios Pitar, the Sky Father; in Greek, Zeus Pater; in Latin, Jupiter; in Germanic, Tiwaz or later Odin. This figure is associated with the bright sky, with sovereignty and justice, with the cosmic order that maintains the universe. He is the father of gods and men, the ultimate source of authority and legitimacy. His name itself, derived from the Proto-Indo-European Rutya, meaning to shine or sky, is one of the oldest words in any Indo-European language. The Sky Father is often paired with an Earth Mother, representing the fertile ground that receives the rain from heaven and brings forth life. This divine couple, sky and earth, father and mother, represents the fundamental duality of the cosmos, the union of opposites that generates all existence. In Greek mythology, Gaia, the earth, is the mother of the Titans and ultimately of the Olympian gods. In Norse mythology, the earth is personified as Jord, the mother of Thor. In Vedic mythology, Prithvi, the earth, is the consort of Dios, the sky. This pattern of sacred marriage between heaven and earth is found throughout Indo-European tradition. The thunder god is another central figure in Indo-European mythology, a powerful warrior deity who wields the lightning bolt as his weapon and does battle with the forces of chaos. In Vedic mythology, this is Indra, the king of the gods, who slays the dragon Vritra to release the waters and bring fertility to the land. In Greek mythology, Zeus himself takes on this role, wielding the thunderbolt forged by the Cyclopes. In Norse mythology, Thor, the son of Odin, wields the hammer Mjolnir against the giants who threaten the cosmic order. In Baltic mythology, Perkunas, the thunder god, strikes down devils and evil spirits with his axe or hammer. The myth of the dragon slayer, in which a heroic god or mortal defeats a serpentine monster to release waters, treasure, or a captive maiden, is one of the most widespread and enduring of all Indo-European myths. This story appears in countless variations: Indra and Vritra, Zeus and Typhon, Thor and the Midgard serpent, Apollo and Python, Beowulf and the dragon, Saint George and the dragon, Sigurd and Fafnir. The dragon represents chaos, darkness, and death, while the hero represents order, light, and life. The victory of the hero over the dragon is a cosmic event, restoring balance to the universe and ensuring the continuation of life. The divine twins are another recurring motif in Indo-European mythology, a pair of young gods associated with horses, the dawn, and the rescue of those in distress. In Vedic mythology, they are the Ashvins, the horse possessors, who ride across the sky in a golden chariot and bring healing and help to mortals. In Greek mythology, they are the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, the sons of Zeus, who protect sailors and appear as the constellation Gemini. In Baltic mythology, they are the Dievideli, the sons of God, who court the daughter of the sun. The divine twins represent youth, vitality, and the hope of rescue in times of danger. The goddess of the dawn is a figure of particular beauty and poignancy in Indo-European mythology. In Vedic mythology, she is Ushas, who appears each morning in her rose-colored chariot, dispelling the darkness and awakening the world to life. In Greek mythology, she is Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, who opens the gates of heaven for the sun god Helios. In Roman mythology, she is Aurora, whose name survives in the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights. The dawn goddess represents renewal, hope, and the eternal cycle of day and night, light and darkness. The concept of cosmic order, known Asarta in Vedic Sanskrit and Asha in Avestan, is fundamental to Indo-European religious thought. This is not merely physical order, the regular movements of the sun and stars, but moral order, the principle of truth and justice that should govern human behavior. The gods are the guardians of this order, and humans are expected to uphold it through righteous action and truthful speech. Violations of cosmic order bring disaster not only to the individual but to the entire community, disrupting the harmony of the universe. The afterlife in Indo-European mythology is typically conceived as a journey to another realm, often located in the sky or beyond the western horizon. The dead must cross a body of water, guided by a psychopomp or ferryman, to reach the land of the ancestors. In Greek mythology, the dead cross the river Styx in the boat of Charon. In Norse mythology, the slain warriors are carried by the Valkyries to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where they feast and fight until the final battle of Ragnarok. In Vedic mythology, the dead travel the path of the fathers to the realm of Yama, the first mortal to die and now the king of the dead. The concept of a final battle or cosmic catastrophe, in which the forces of order and chaos clash in a decisive confrontation, is found in several Indo-European traditions. In Norse mythology, this is Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the giants and monsters break free from their bonds and attack Asgard, the home of the gods. Odin is swallowed by the wolf Fenrir. Thor kills the Midgard serpent but dies from its venom, and the world is consumed in fire and flood. Yet from the destruction, a new world emerges, green and fertile, and the cycle begins again. In Zoroastrian mythology, the final battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu ends with the complete victory of good over evil and the establishment of a perfect, eternal world. The hero is a central figure in Indo-European mythology, a mortal or semi-divine being who performs extraordinary deeds and often meets a tragic end. The hero is typically of noble or divine parentage, marked from birth for greatness. He undergoes trials and adventures, slaying monsters, winning treasures, and rescuing the helpless. He is often aided by divine patrons and magical objects. Yet the hero is also flawed, subject to pride, anger, or fate, and his story often ends in death, sometimes at the height of his glory. Achilles, Heracles, Sigurd, Cuchulainn, Arjuna, all embody this heroic pattern, their stories inspiring and instructing audiences across cultures and centuries. The mythology of the Indo-European peoples is not merely a collection of entertaining stories, but a profound meditation on the human condition. It addresses the great questions that have always concerned humanity: the origin of the world and its ultimate fate, the nature of the gods and their relationship to mortals, the meaning of life and death, the sources of good and evil, the proper conduct of individuals and societies. These myths provided frameworks for understanding experience, models for behavior, and sources of meaning and purpose. They were not believed literally, in the way that modern fundamentalists believe their scriptures, but were understood as symbolic expressions of deep truths about reality. The influence of Indo-European mythology extends far beyond the cultures that originally produced it. Greek and Roman mythology shaped Western art, literature, and thought for over 2,000 years. Norse mythology inspired the Romantic movement and continues to influence popular culture, from Wagner's operas to Marvel's Thor. Hindu mythology remains a living tradition, shaping the religious lives of over 1 billion people. The archetypes and patterns of Indo-European myth, the hero's journey, the battle between good and evil, the cycle of death and rebirth, have become part of the common heritage of humanity, transcending their origins to speak to universal human concerns. As we reach the end of this journey through the world of the Proto-Indo-Europeans and their descendants, we must pause to consider the magnitude of what we have witnessed. From a relatively small population of pastoralists on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, there emerged a cultural and linguistic tradition that would eventually encompass half the world's population. The languages they spoke evolved into tongues now used by 3 billion people. The gods they worshipped transformed into the deities of Greece and Rome of India and Persia of the Germanic and Celtic worlds. The social structures they developed influenced the organization of societies from ancient empires to modern nation-states. The myths they told continue to shape our imagination and our understanding of what it means to be human. The story of the Indo-Europeans is, in many ways, the story of human civilization itself. It is a story of migration and adaptation, of conquest and assimilation, of cultural exchange and transformation. It demonstrates both the unity and the diversity of human experience, showing how a common heritage can give rise to vastly different cultures while retaining underlying connections that link them across time and space. It reminds us that the boundaries between peoples and cultures are never as fixed as they might appear, that history is a process of constant change and interaction. The Indo-European expansion was not a single event, but a process that unfolded over millennia, driven by a complex interplay of factors. The domestication of the horse gave the steppe peoples unprecedented mobility, allowing them to cover vast distances and to strike with speed and surprise. The invention of wheeled vehicles enabled them to transport their families, their herds, and their possessions across the grasslands. The development of bronze metallurgy provided them with superior weapons and tools. The social organization of the warrior band, with its emphasis on loyalty, courage, and honor, created formidable fighting forces. And perhaps most importantly, the diseases they carried, to which they had developed immunity through long exposure to their domestic animals, devastated populations that had no such protection. Yet the Indo-European expansion was not simply a matter of conquest and replacement. In most regions, the incoming Indo-Europeans merged with existing populations, creating hybrid cultures that combined elements from both traditions. The languages that emerged from this process were Indo-European in structure and vocabulary, but they absorbed words and concepts from the languages they replaced. The religions that developed combined Indo-European deities and rituals with those of indigenous traditions. The social structures that evolved reflected both Indo-European hierarchies and local customs. The result was not uniformity but diversity, a family of related cultures rather than a single monolithic civilization. The legacy of the Indo-Europeans is visible everywhere in the modern world, though we are often unaware of it. When we speak English or Spanish, Hindi or Russian, we are using languages descended from Proto-Indo-European. When we read the Iliad or the Mahabharata, the Eddas or the Tombo-Queonghe, we are encountering stories that derive from common Indo-European roots. When we study philosophy, we are engaging with traditions that began with Greek and Indian thinkers grappling with questions first posed in Indo-European terms. When we participate in democratic politics, we are drawing on institutions that evolved from Indo-European assemblies and councils. When we celebrate Christmas or Diwali, Easter or Nowruz, we are observing festivals that incorporate elements of ancient Indo-European rituals. The study of the Indo-Europeans has itself been shaped by the historical circumstances in which it developed. The discovery of the Indo-European language family in the 18th and 19th centuries coincided with the rise of European colonialism and nationalism, and the concept of an Aryan race was misused to justify imperialism, racism, and ultimately genocide. The Nazi regime's appropriation of Indo-European symbols and terminology, including the swastika, an ancient Indo-European sun symbol, has cast a long shadow over the field. Modern scholars are acutely aware of this history and are careful to distinguish between legitimate scientific inquiry and ideological misuse. Today, the study of the Indo-Europeans is a vibrant interdisciplinary field, drawing on linguistics, archaeology, genetics, and other disciplines to create an ever more detailed picture of these ancient peoples. The revolution in ancient DNA analysis has been particularly transformative, allowing researchers to trace the movements of populations with unprecedented precision. We now know that the Yamnaya and related steppe peoples did indeed migrate into Europe and South Asia during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE, largely confirming the linguistic hypothesis. We can trace the genetic signatures of these migrations in modern populations, seeing how the steppe ancestry mixed with that of earlier inhabitants to create the genetic landscape of today. The Indo-European story also raises profound questions about identity and belonging. Who are the heirs of the Proto-Indo-Europeans? In one sense, everyone who speaks an Indo-European language or participates in a culture shaped by Indo-European traditions is an heir, but genetic ancestry is a different matter, and the relationship between language, culture, and biology is complex. A person of entirely non-Indo-European genetic ancestry, who speaks English and participates in Western culture, is as much an heir to the Indo-European tradition as someone whose ancestors lived on the Pontic steppe 5,000 years ago. Culture is not transmitted through genes, but through learning, through the passing on of knowledge, skills, and values from one generation to the next. The Indo-European legacy is not without its darker aspects. The warrior culture that enabled the Indo-European expansion also glorified violence and conquest. The hierarchical social structures that organized Indo-European societies also created inequalities and oppressions. The patriarchal family patterns that characterized Indo-European culture also subordinated women and limited their opportunities. These aspects of the Indo-European inheritance have been challenged and transformed over time, but their influence persists in various forms. Understanding the Indo-European legacy means grappling with both its achievements and its limitations, its contributions and its costs. As we look to the future, the Indo-European story offers both warnings and inspirations. It warns us that no civilization, however powerful, is permanent, that the great empires of the past have all fallen, and that the cultures we take for granted will eventually be transformed beyond recognition. It warns us that the movements of peoples and the clashes of cultures can bring both creative synthesis and destructive conflict. It warns us that ideas and symbols can be misused for terrible purposes, that the search for origins can become a justification for exclusion and violence. But the Indo-European story also inspires us with its demonstration of human creativity and resilience. From the harsh environment of the steppe, people created technologies and social forms that enabled them to thrive and expand. From the encounter between different cultures, new syntheses emerged that were richer than either parent tradition. From the myths and rituals of ancient peoples, profound insights into the human condition were developed that continue to speak to us today. The Indo-European story is ultimately a story of human potential, of what people can achieve when they adapt, innovate, and build upon the achievements of those who came before. The echoes of the ancient steppe still resound in our world. Every time a child learns to speak an Indo-European language, every time a scholar reads an ancient text, every time a believer prays to a god whose origins lie in the mists of prehistory, the legacy of the Proto-Indo-Europeans lives on. They are our ancestors, not necessarily in a genetic sense, but in a cultural sense, the people who set in motion the traditions that have shaped our world. Their story is our story, a story that began on the windswept grasslands of the Pontic-Caspian steppe and continues to unfold in the lives of billions of people around the globe. And so we end where we began, with the vast expanse of the Eurasian steppe, stretching from horizon to horizon under an endless sky. The people who once roamed these grasslands are long gone, their bones mingled with the earth, their voices silenced by the passage of millennia. But their legacy endures, carried forward by their descendants across continents and centuries, transformed and renewed with each generation, yet still recognizably connected to its ancient source. The Proto-Indo-Europeans may be forgotten, their names lost to history, their faces unknown. But in the languages we speak, the stories we tell, the gods we worship, and the values we hold, they live on, an eternal presence in the ever-changing flow of human civilization. The wind still blows across the steppe, as it has for countless ages. The grass still ripples like waves on a green sea. The sky still arches overhead, vast and blue and infinite. And somewhere in that landscape, if we listen carefully, we can almost hear the distant thunder of hooves, the creak of wooden wheels, the songs of a people setting out on a journey that would change the world forever. Their journey continues in us, in every word we speak, every story we tell, every dream we dream. We are the children of the steppe, the heirs of the horse tamers, the bearers of a legacy that spans 5,000 years and circles the globe. And as long as we remember, as long as we speak and think and create, the spirit of those ancient wanderers will never truly die.